It's time to fire up the grill and unleash the flavor of American-raised Black Angus beef straight to your door. Your curated box arrives. It's time to fire up the grill and unleash the flavor of American-raised Black Angus beef straight to your door. Your curated box arrives, packed with cuts guaranteed to deliver maximum tenderness and flavor. We never use hormones or antibiotics ever, and straight to your door. Your curated box arrives, packed with cuts guaranteed to deliver maximum tenderness and flavor. We never use hormones or It's time to fire up the grill and unleash the flavor of American-raised Black Angus beef straight to your door. Your curated box arrives, packed with cuts guaranteed to deliver maximum tenderness and flavor. We never use hormones or antibiotics ever, and our 21-day aged beef will make your backyard barbecue dreams come true. Visit wethepatriotshop.com/big and ask for info right away. Get your box on its way to your door. And our 21-day aged beef will make your backyard barbecue dreams come true. Visit wethepatriotshop.com/big and ask for info right away and get your box on its way to your door. That's wethepatriotshop.com/big. Your box on its way to your door. That's wethepatriotshop.com/big. Visit wethepatriotshop.com/big and ask for info right away and get your box on its way to your door. That's wethepatriotshop.com/big. It's time to fire up the grill and unleash the flavor of American-raised Black Angus beef straight to your door. Your curated box arrives, packed with cuts guaranteed to deliver maximum tenderness and flavor. We never use hormones or antibiotics ever, and our 21-day aged beef will make your backyard barbecue dreams come true. Visit wethepatriotshop.com/big and ask for info right away and get your box on its way to your door. That's wethepatriotshop.com/big. It's time. That's wethepatriotshop.com/big. It's time to fire up the grill and unleash. It's time to fire up the grill and unleash. It's time to fire up the grill and unleash the flavor of American-raised Black Angus beef straight to your door. Your curated box arrives, packed with cuts guaranteed to deliver maximum tenderness and flavor. We never use hormones or antibiotics ever, and our 21-day aged beef will make your backyard barbecue dreams come true. Visit wethepatriotshop.com/big and ask for info right away and get your box on its way to your door. That's wethepatriotshop.com/big.
Introducing to you. You're on House of Cards. Live on Facebook and YouTube. It's going down now. Locked and loaded with the truth. Introducing to you. You're on House of Cards. Live on Facebook and YouTube. It's going down now. Locked and loaded with the truth.
I'd like to once again call today's meeting the House Ad Hoc Committee to examine judicial selection and retention process in South Carolina to order. Good afternoon. I thank everyone for who is here with us today, especially the public. Before we get started, I'd like to lead us in prayer, and then we'll have a pledge of allegiance. Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to be before you today. Give us wisdom, give us discernment in the work that we're doing. Help everyone that's here and the families they represent to do best for what's best for the state, what's best for this community, what's best for the judiciary. All these things we ask in Jesus' name. Everybody said, amen. If we could rise for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I appreciate the folks in the audience. Again, has anybody not had a chance to sign up? I want to point out that a number of other hearings are taking place today. I appreciate the members showing up. You'll probably see some interchange of members being in and then having to run out. I know Mr. Caskey had to go to Ways and Means a minute, but it's no disrespect to the important issues that you're bringing before us today. And so I just want to point that out. So if you see somebody have to come in or leave, it's certainly no disrespect to those that have come here today. Let's see, Ms. Cobb Hunter expresses her regret. She had something back in district she had to do. Was there another member too that had an excused absence? I know Mr. Guffey is testifying in Washington. You might have followed that he had the sextortion bill and the tragedy that happened to his son. He is up in Washington testifying. So Mr. Guffey and Ms. Cobb Hunter will not be with us. I noticed a number of familiar faces out there that have testified in front of judiciary committees before. I want to point out a couple things. Our discussion today is an issue of importance to many. The process South Carolina uses to select and retain judges. Today, we're going to hear from you, the public. As stated on the agenda, the focus of the committee's inquiry is more about the system for selecting judges and holding them accountable and less about individual judges. I know, as we learned with legislators, oftentimes somebody wants to hear the facts specific, not generalities. And so I respect that, but I'll tell you kind of our focus. Of particular interest is testimony related to the General Assembly and what we do to enhance the public's confidence in judges, enhance the practice of being a judge, improve the constitutionally required process, and revise qualifications and jurisdictions of magistrates. To those in the audience, we're glad you're here participating in the process. However, please note that no matter the topic under discussion, any outburst, clapping, or anything of that sort is not appropriate. I'll even say that for the members up here. If we'll ask you not to do it, we won't do it too. The final thing I will tell you is that it's important for you to understand, again, a number of you I've spoken to in the past, is I have to oftentimes tell constituents it's the same is true for this committee. We cannot intervene or attempt to impact any judicial matter or quasi-judicial matter that is ongoing. And so legislatively, we're forbidden by our rules and the rules of canons of ethics to get involved in a case itself. And so recognizing the time that each will have, I think it's allocated to 3 minutes. Is that correct, Jennifer? I just don't want you, losing your time by focusing on something that we can't help with. So with that being said, we'll start at the beginning of the list. Do any members have anything before we start? Are we good to go? All right. We will start with Patrick L. Booker. Mr. Booker, if you would make sure your microphone's on, and if you'd give your full name and the county you reside in. And again, I have here to reemphasize that the committee will not intervene or attempt to impact any judicial matter, and that your testimony is 3 minutes. We'll be glad to hear from you at this time. Thank you, Mr. Booker.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And thank you all distinguished members of this body. My name is Patrick Booker. That's Patrick Booker. Booker. I'm from Greenwood, South Carolina. And I just come up here today just to address these issues right here. With respect to the issues permitted to be spoken to and addressed, I, Patrick Lee Booker, hereby offer my public input as follows. In order to enhance the public confidence in judges and the practice of being a judge, the General Assembly should require judges to themselves make specific findings of fact and conclusions of law with respect to each issue that they determine. And what I mean by that is that the General Assembly should prohibit judges from accepting or adopting proposed findings or proposed orders, especially from the state or from a large legislature. And I say that because a judge has a Juris Doctorate. He's paid to be able to utilize his own judicial wisdom, not to adopt the legal arguments or the judicial wisdom from somebody else. So I think that would enhance the public's confidence in the judge and the practice of being a judge, because it will cause him or her to actually go through the case himself, him or herself. The second one is, in order to enhance the public confidence in judges and the practice of being a judge, the General Assembly should regulate how many times a judge is allowed to violate their oath. Is it one time? Is it two times? Is it three times? Before they are automatically referred for removal. I understand removal has to be an impeachment process if they're an elected official, but I think that it should have, the legislature should show that they mean business. You swear an oath. How many times do you allow to violate the oath? And I say that because I know of several, I can't talk to specific judges, but I know of a municipal court judge and a magistrate judge. I've seen the affidavits. They issued these affidavits. They issued the warrants. The affidavit that support the warrant showed that the crime itself had not even occurred yet. So their pledge to rule only after considered deliberation means that judge either, when they signed those arrest warrants, you either knew that the crime had not happened, you were authorizing an arrest for something that didn't happen, or you just didn't do your oath by reading what you signing. So I think that we need to regulate how many times they violate their oath. And the last thing I would say is that in order to enhance the public confidence in judges and the practice of being a judge, the General Assembly shall set forth a statutory code of ethics for members of the South Carolina Supreme Court, which shall provide, among other things, automatic referral for a judicial inquiry by the Senate Judiciary Committee to resolve any credible allegations of serious misconduct. And I wrote, and I'm gonna submit this if I may, and I wrote by members of the public, but I meant the serious misconduct would be the allegations by a member of the public. Like if a member of the public have the allegation, perhaps it could be referred for automatic inquiry, automatic judicial inquiry, if it's a serious allegation, it's credible. And I end this by saying, without naming any individual judge, I want this body to know that several judges, 5 in total, in this state came together and decided to issue an order restricting a United States citizen's free exercise and enjoyment of his federal and state rights. These judges, however, failed or refused to provide this U.S. citizen any due process or equal protection of the law when they conspired to deprive their citizens of his rights. Basically, what I'm saying is that on a certain date, not long, years ago, some judges came together and decided they wanted to restrict a person from being able to file whatever they were filing. But they did it in violation of the law. They didn't give that person no notice, no opportunity to be heard. They just sent the order to him telling him he can't never come back to court again, challenge whatever he's challenging, unless he first asked them for permission to do so. These is a group of highest judges in the state. So if the person got the order in violation, it was sent to him in violation. When he look at it, he don't have no confidence to ask those judges for permission to be able to do something because you already done violated the law.
And
So,
you indicated too that, and I apologize, I know you saw the times running out. I was trying to give you some latitude to come in for a landing. You said you have a copy you could provide of us of your
Yes,
remarks. Okay,
yes,
and I will staff will get it and share it with us. Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Booker? Right. One thing I guess for the members, and I'm showing my ignorance. I know as an attorney, if there are violations, there is an accountability process where you'd report me to the bar and things of that nature. I noticed that, if we're talking about magistrate level, some are attorneys and some aren't. But is there a reporting requirement for judges, just like they are with us with the bar, if they're non-attorneys? Is it the judicial canons? Do they have the same? I don't know the answer to that one. Yes, sir. Mr. Manberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I believe the judicial canons are going to apply to all judges, lawyer or non-lawyer. And then if you happen to be a judge who is also a lawyer, you have the second layer, which is the bar ODC and stuff like that.
So does ODC, if I wanted, like I had a concern that was a judge that was a non-lawyer, I can still, report it to ODC? When we say contact the Supreme Court, is that what's happening?
Yeah, it would be the same reporting.
If I may just say this very briefly, and I was referring to, I know they have the Judicial Commission, the Commission on Judicial Conduct
Right.
for judges, but there seem to be, a circuit court magistrate, all that. That's why I've seen in the reports. I've never seen an appellate court judge being reprimanded. But in any event, I was talking about the Supreme Court justice members themselves because they're the one that's charged with discipline attorneys and judges in this state. But who guards the guards?
Fox Garden Hen House. Right? Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you. Good deal. Thank you. I'm sorry to cut short, Mr.
You good.
Mr.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
y'all.
sir. Thank you. And you got a copy of his materials. Next up, Carlton Walker. For members in the audience and Mr. Walker, so we don't have to go through it every time, turn on the microphone and we can't intervene.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. And we can't intervene in an ongoing case. I know you and I have spoken before, but thank you, sir. Appreciate you being here. If you tell them your full name and the county you're from.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee. My name's Carlton Walker. I'm from District 15. I'm a broker in charge in real estate, contractor, SLED CWP, certified instructor. I have a few suggestions on how the Judicial Merit Selection Commission could be modified to give the power back to the people. If you look for the South Carolina Residential Builders Commission, it's statute 405910. They have some requirements in there. One of the things that they do in this book for the Builders Commission, which they should do for the Judicial Merit Selection Commission, is they have a commissioner from each of the 7 congressional districts around the state. That would give equal representation. So that way, you go to and I would make that position, the way I would change the Judicial Merit Selection Commission, we got 10 members. 7 of those members should be elected from the public. That would be given power back to the people. So you would have 1 commissioner from each of the 7 congressional districts that are non-lawyers or paralegals, because it's a conflict of interest for a lawyer to be selecting judges. The last 3 seats, 1 would be selected from the House, 1 would be selected from the Senate, and 1 appointed by the governor. So you would have 3 lawyers on the commission that would make sure everything was legal, but you would be giving these commissioners, it's kind of like the Commissioner of Public Works is an elected position around the state. Why don't we make this an elected position? We can't change our Constitution. We still have to have 10 members. But we can change the way we select those members. Now, I personally filed a complaint against the Judicial Merit Selection Commission about a judge. This book and the ODC and the Judicial Merit Selection Commission, it's not worth the paper you write it on. I had a 47-page affidavit, 1,400 pages of exhibits. Chairman Popes read the transcripts. He voted against that judge. That judge got reappointed. We have a serious problem when judges don't follow laws, don't follow the Constitution, and as a 4th-generation veteran who served in Somalia in '93, I am not going to stand around and let this continue in our state. And on this book, it says South Carolina is the battleground for freedom. It's time that we give the power back to the people to let them hold accountable or hold judges accountable. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time today. Any questions? Yes, Ms. Wetmore.
Thank you so much for being here. It's interesting. I deal a lot with the Builders Commission, and I appreciate that reference. I think that's an important position. Are the members on the Building Commission not builders? Is that a conflict?
They have non people that are not part of the industry and people that are builders and specialty contractors on that commission. But for the difference is in the Judicial Merit Selection Commission, like one person said, well, hey, if it is an elected position from one of the 7 congressional districts, what if that commissioner goes in front of a judge? Well, he'd be going in front of a judge for a case, not practicing law every single day in front of a judge that they're selecting.
No, and I understand
Yeah.
that. And I guess my question is, if I make a complaint to the building commission, as I do through my practice, are the contractors that are on that commission conflicted out?
From hearing a case about a complaint, no, they're not.
About one of their contractors, about so obviously if I'm complaining to the Residential Builder Commission, I'm complaining about a licensed contractor. Are the contractors responsible for policing that behavior conflicted out of that decision?
The members, I think the members on the 10, or the contractors that are on the Residential Builders Commission would not be unless that was one of their contractors or subs. I mean,
Okay.
that would be legitimate. But the difference between a lawyer being on the commission, that lawyer is going to be practicing in front of a judge who is over him during the trial. So
As
you
opposed
can't
to
have,
over him during the complaint?
well, see, the way it works right now, I mean, if you file a complaint, and I went in front of the Judicial Merit Selection Commission with a literally 47-page affidavit, pointed out every I and every T, how it was horrible, man. There was 6 misstatements of information in there that completely destroyed my life and my child's life. I have not seen my daughter since September 12th of 2022. And my case came into practice, was filed April of 2019, and the 365-day rule, judge doesn't care.
Well, I'm sorry for that experience. I appreciate the analogy. Thank you so much.
So I think it'd be great to have where it's an elected position, because here's the problem. When you file a complaint right now, if that person, the commissioner, is selected by the governor or someone else, you know, a little lay person that doesn't have money to appeal something, you know, they're stuck with that decision. And if you had a commissioner that you could go to and file a complaint with that's in your congressional area, that person could hold that judge accountable and put those commissioners on 2 6-year terms. And when you first started, 4 of them would be on a 3-year term, and 3 would be on a 6-year term. And so every 3 years, you have commissioners getting moved based on the, the election cycle.
Mr. Walker, Mr. Ott has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Walker, thank you for being here, first and foremost. I think it's obvious to everyone that you care a lot about this issue. It means a lot to you. It means a lot to a lot of different people all across the state. So I appreciate you taking the time out. I just want to make sure that, this is being broadcast, so I just want to make sure that we don't confuse certain things. You said, I think I heard you correctly when you said that your recommendation was 10 members on the,
Correct.
on the JMSC. As required under the Constitution. And I don't think that's required under the Constitution. I just want to put that straight. And if we need someone to correct me on that, then let me know, Mr. Chairman. But it just speaks to having to have a merit selection committee. I don't think that it speaks to there having to be 10 members. So I think that I just want the people hearing it to not think that we are confined in our work to having to have 10 members. I think we can come up with something different ultimately if we see fit.
I haven't read the actual Constitution on that section. So, I was assuming that, the 10 members. So I just came up with a way to select the 10 members that would be given the power back to the people.
Sure.
So like someone like me, when I complain, I'm like, look, I have an opportunity to sit down with that commissioner and say, look, here's how this judge did this. It's not following the rules or I got it tagged and everything and pointed out exactly what happened. And that judge is back to practicing law or
I
practicing as a
understand,
judge.
And I'm with you.
And some people will say,
No.
some people will say, well, it's just one case. Well, it's one life. If in the military, we got what's called attaboys and foo bars. You get a bunch of attaboys. You can do a bunch of great stuff, but you get one foo bar, your career's over. Like when I was in Somalia, my captain ran our ship aground.
I'm with you. Yes,
and
sir.
That was the end of his career.
And I get it. You know what I mean? I understand the magnitude of it. I just want to make sure that we're all operating off of the same set, the understanding of what we can do and what we can't do. I think you bring up a very good point, though, even if it's not what you intended to do, which is right now with our current Judicial Merit Screening Committee of 10 members, right? I don't know why we should have an odd number, in my opinion. And I'll just put that out there for the committee's consideration, because with 10, I think that obviously leads to motions being made and then ultimately failing because we don't reach the threshold of a majority. So I think, I don't know if I agree necessarily on the congressional districts. I think that what you are showing by bringing us an example is that there are a lot of different ways to restructure this committee. I think at the end of the day, I'm hoping that we all get to the point where we agree that that's what we want to do, is restructure this committee so that it can work more efficiently and better. And I don't think it's just going to be the committee. Like, I think that at some point we're going to have to broaden our horizon and look at the entire process from start to finish if we're going to
Absolutely.
make fundamental change that is ultimately necessary. But I just, since you had thrown it out there as if it was a constitutional requirement that we had to work within, I just wanted to make sure you knew it's
No,
not a
no,
no.
I appreciate that.
And just to
And
help clear it up, so section 20, Article 5, section 27 says that the General Assembly by law shall establish judicial merit selection commission to consider the qualifications. I think what Mr. Walker's referring to is actually the statute that then was brought out that delineate that. And that's where we can make the
Amend the
changes
statute.
we need to change, because we can do it statutorily.
I mean, we have the Commissioner of Public Works in Charleston. I'm friends with him. And like, that's an elected position. Why don't we have the Judicial Merit Selection Commissioners that are on that commission elected by the people from around the state? And that would give an opportunity for people to actually hold the judges accountable.
Yes. Mr. Robbins recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Walker, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for speaking to the topic and also offering a recommendation to us. Many before you have not actually spoken to the topic. So I appreciate you doing that. And Mr. Chairman, I would concur with Representative Ott, and I believe I made that recommendation at our last meeting that we have an odd number of members. Didn't get reported on, but I made that recommendation, and I strongly agree with the good representative from Calhoun that we need an odd number. Thank you.
And staff is taking down those notes. As I keep telling you, I keep putting it in buckets, and the odd number part is part of one of those buckets for consideration. Mr. Thigpen is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Walker, for coming.
welcome.
Passionate and well said, spoken presentation. I want to give just a little bit of clarity. I agree with those who have spoken before me, and that thank you for sticking to the subject. Thank you for offering a solution, because a lot of times people come and complain about the problem.
You got to
but,
show the solution.
yeah, have given little consideration to how we move towards a solution. You mentioned, and I just wanted to restate quickly, 7 congressional districts, an appointment from each one. And, I don't know, and would have to look to the statute as far as, do we account for geographical diversity currently from different parts of the state? But you said no lawyers, you said paralegals or others. How would these individuals be selected? Would there be an election? Would there be an appointment from somebody? Who would be the appointing bodies? If you could elaborate on it, if you've given thought to it.
Yeah, my suggestion would be each commissioner, kind of like we have 7 U.S. congressional or congressmen, you would have an election every 6 years, and the people would decide who that commissioner is. Just like right now, Charleston County Public Works Commissioner, that's an elected position.
So those persons would have to campaign for those
Exactly,
positions?
but we'd also make it to where that person cannot be a lawyer or a paralegal, because then
say-
that's where that conflict, then
They
that's
could
where.
not be paralegals? I thought you were advocating for them to
No,
be
no,
paralegals.
no, not.
Okay,
And the
gotcha.
reason I say that is, give me an example. The Dodd-Frank Act in 2008, I'm a real estate broker. I used to be a real estate, a mortgage broker. And back in the mortgage days, we used to tell appraisers, look, man, I want you to appraise that house for $450. I know it's only worth $350. And if you don't, then we're not going to use you anymore. And they'd be put on a blacklist if they didn't do as we asked. And that's what caused the crash in 07, 08. And Dodd-Frank Act came out, and it's currently a law now, and it's enforced on real estate industry too, where we cannot contact an appraiser. Once we need an appraisal on a house, we have to submit the appraisal, and it's put into a wagon wheel that spins, and a random appraiser goes and appraises a house, and we cannot contact them, neither can the mortgage broker, until that appraisal comes back with a value. And then we can talk to them. But it's kind of like that thing, man. It's like, and the difference between a commissioner that's elected going in front of a judge versus a lawyer that's a commissioner, that lawyer would have power over the judges, where it's like, look, man, he wouldn't say this outright, but you know, a wink, hey, yeah, you're coming up for reappointment in 3 months. And, you know, pretty much if my case doesn't go the way I want it, he won't say that, but you know, that's implied. And this favoritism and nepotism needs to stop.
Well, and I want to thank you, and thank you for the analogy. I want to make sure I get clarity on what you said. So they would campaign, but you would prohibit lawyers or paralegals for campaigning or running for this elected office.
Correct. And here's where the other 3 slots, if it's going to be 10, or it could be 4, but have the House select the lawyer to be on that commission, the Senate select one, and have the governor appoint one. So you still have lawyers on there to make sure.
That was my next question. Were you saying that the 3 from the House, Senate, and governor appointed would be lawyers?
Correct.
And I don't know, for the lawyers that are on here, could we prohibit lawyers or paralegals from campaigning for an elected office?
You know, we normally have qualifications, not disqualifications, so that would be an interesting legal question, and I'm sure a lot of lawyers would make a lot
Well,
of money.
I'm not trying to beat up on lawyers, but it's like.
No, me neither. I just, to his point, I think it becomes a legal question, and I don't know the answer to it. That's why I asked.
I would say this: if it's a retired lawyer or retired paralegal, sure, they could run for the commission because they're not actively practicing under the judges that they would be selecting.
No, you understand what I'm saying, though. Like, I understand your sentiment and I understand your end goal. I'm talking about from a constitutionality and people's rights standpoint. Could we do that? That was what I was trying to,
I mean, I would be open to keeping lawyers on there if there was some kind of clause in there that, hey, look, if, this judge is within 2 years of coming up for reappointment and you're going to go in front of this judge, or that judge is coming in front of the Judicial Merit Selection Commission that you're on, like, you can't practice in front of that judge. The judge would have to recuse themselves, because that whole issue where, like, if you go in front of a judge and then that judge comes up for reappointment 3 months later and that judge is thrown off for no reason, and that person recused themselves from being on the commission, but the judge was still removed, and then, someone else is appointed in their favor, like that stuff like that's got to stop.
That same issue is one thing we talked about when we talked about term limits for JMSC, staggering terms. In other words, you may come and run for a judge in front of me the first time, but you wouldn't have to worry about seeing me again when you came up. So there's some other things. And ultimately, even the rotation of like subgroups within JMSC, that's something once they establish their rules could do to address the evil he's talking about. So there's some other things in there that
I'm open. I'm not trying to bash lawyers, but there would have to be some kind of precaution put in place to, like, look, I mean, it's kind of like a real estate agent or a mortgage broker saying, hey, you got to give us $450 on that house, or we're telling everybody we know not to use you guys. I mean, it's kind of like the Dodd-Frank Act. I mean, you got to stop that. I mean, that destroyed our economy in 2008.
Yes, sir. Yes, and a lot of lawyers went to jail on that one too. So, Mr. Wooten, I recognize you have a question too, Mr. Walker. I wanted to tell you, I'm gonna let Mr. Wooten ask his question, but I want to be respectful. We've got probably another dozen folks behind you. So, Mr. Wooten, you recognize, sir.
Yes, sir. Just a quick question. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service as well. From this side, when we start, as we try to figure this thing out, and who can be on these boards and who can't, and who can serve on the JMSC. And we keep hearing talk about not having lawyers, and the idea of retired lawyers being able to be there. And what I've come to find is there's a lot of retired lawyers that still have an interest in certain firms. They started the Johnson & Johnson law firm. They're retired from that, and then now there's folks working for that law firm under this person that still may own it, that may sit here. So does that create the same conflict of interest? Billy Smith works for the Johnson Law Firm. Is he qualified or not qualified because this judge sits on the JMSC? I don't know how you fix that if you've got that magic answer.
I mean, I'm all up for debating this because, I mean, that's how we figure out what the best solution is. But to that answer, I
just don't know where it stops.
Yeah.
How do we qualify and disqualify folks from sitting on this? Because of the optics of it, that's what we're trying to fix. A lot of it is the optics are the point of, well, does he get preferential treatment because he or she serves for this firm? So I don't know.
I don't know the answers to all that, but maybe there needs to be something in it, like I said earlier, like if their lawyers are on there, if there's a case, I mean, it's got to be a different judge. I don't know how that would work.
Okay.
But I mean,
I was hoping you'd answer that for me.
I mean, the only thing I could suggest, okay, so say, obviously lawyers are allowed to practice anywhere in the state. Say if you had a case in Charleston and that law firm that commissioner that's retired came out of that law firm in Charleston, but his law firm's, having a case in Greenville, then, I mean, maybe we'd have to look at it. But, if you're practicing in Greenville and the judge in Charleston's coming up for reappointment, there's no conflict there, I guess.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here
I
today, sir.
appreciate you. Thank you for your time.
Wish you good luck. James Walker. Mr. James Walker. I know that was a friendly clap. Yeah, no problem. I know that was a friendly clap, not a taunting clap, but we're not clapping either. Okay. Mr. Walker, you're recognized, sir. Second,
Thank you.
Mr. Walker. Yes.
Thank you. My name is James Walker. I live on James Island, which is overseas from Charleston there. And I'm graduated electrical engineering, graduated of Citadel in 1969, so I'm retired now. But I'm going to be a little less specific than all this. But last Saturday, there was a nice editorial in the Post and Courier about the Merit Selection Committee, and their main thing was actually on diversity, and because there's a lot of old white guys in the Supreme Court and everything, and I'm an old white guy, so that doesn't bother me personally so much, but there needs to be more appearance of that in the committee. But the big thing is, yes, the way the judges are selected, it's kind of secret. And you vote from secret. There's 170 votes to vote for them, so you can always hide behind that. Well, it's a good old boy network, and I think we all realize that, and that's been a problem for a long time. So, So right now, the solution, is what my son was putting out. You have a lot of people. Now, the governor could appoint that. I disagree with him necessarily a little bit about electing everybody, because that means a campaign and you got to get money, and then you can be obliged to your campaign donors too. So there's questions about that too, as to whether the best way for the governor to appoint each commission from each congressional district, which would make sense. But at least the governor is kind of answerable too, because he has a cabinet and he has to answer for the people he appoints to his cabinet. And I say, yeah, I agree with the things. Just, if you get lawyers involved, with the same problem that you've talked about a lot before on my son's thing is, because a practicing lawyer legislator can be, he's appointing a judge, approving a judge, and yet he's going to be before that same judge, and that causes a lot of conflict. Now, a conflict of interest. Now, as to the ethics of judges. Now, there's been the federal government has stringent standards of conduct for enforcement of legal files, and in the United States, and South Carolina could adopt some of that. But right now, they have the South Carolina Code of Judicial Conduct, and the code contains 3 canons that have ethical standards. And this responsibility outlines the responsibility of the judiciary. But in the last 20 years, there have been 0 judges have been held accountable, and there's been over 1,000 complaints. So Now, I haven't been gone before the regular court, but the family court is really needs a lot of reform. It's the family court is not about families, not about justice, and not about the truths. And that's a legal, that's a whole separate issue from, I think, what we're talking about here, the choosing of the judges. But it certainly needs to be looked at because a family court judge in a court of law or in a traffic court, you can request a jury trial. You can't do that in a family court. And the family court, I know personally of two judges that have broken a lot of rules and nothing's ever happened to them. And so that's my biggest issue right now because that's my most experience with family court because I haven't been to the circuit court or anything else except for traffic court, stuff like that.
I can tell you, Mr. Walker, I used to be solicitor. Nobody ever comes when things are going good to circuit court. So we'll hope you don't.
No, that's true. That's true. Yes.
So that's your 3 minutes, sir. But I want to see.
Yes, but they are up. Yes, thank you.
If any members have any questions. Yes, Mr. Robbins recognized.
Yes, sir.
There we go. Mr. Walker, thank you also for coming. And I just wanted to ask you one question based on a comment you made. Do you believe that the problem is a lawyer, legislator voting for a judge, or do you believe the problem is the lawyer, legislator serving on the JMSC? Or
Well,
both?
Both, really. It's a conflict of interest. I can see. I think because
To be a legislator voting on all of these judges.
well,
no matter what your
not
practice
as legislator
is?
voting on the judges, not necessarily that, but selecting them.
What about a legislator who doesn't practice litigation law, that practices real estate law, that's never in a courtroom? That legislator can't vote for a judge?
Well, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
That
it's,
would be-
it's just
yeah.
it's just people that are in court,
That go into court in front of the judges.
no matter whether they appear in
Yeah.
just a limited number of jurisdictions.
Well, that's a sticky question. You would have to, maybe if you had, okay, if a lawyer was going to be voting on a judge and going before that judge, maybe he should request a different judge.
Which has
for that
been the
particular-
practice in South Carolina for a long time.
Yeah,
This just didn't start happening 2 years ago.
right, yeah.
And are you aware too that judge has, as does that lawyer, has an oath and a code of conduct that requires that judge to recuse him or herself if they believe they are in a conflict of interest situation?
Well, I was partially aware of that, yes, sir. But I just saying, there's been 1,000 complaints in the last 20 years and no judge has been, so maybe they're doing a good job. I don't know, at least in circuit court and everything. So
I don't know
Yeah.
if that statistic is accurate,
Yeah.
but I would tell you that there were 1,000 complaints in 20 years. That's a pretty minuscule number.
okay,
I just want to try to understand, and then with respect to the JMSC, so if a current member votes on a judge and that judge has a 6-year term, if that current member rolls off of the JMSC before that judge comes back up for reelection, what do you think about that?
there wouldn't be a problem with that. If he comes up for reelection, says there's a different member of the selection committee,
Right.
yeah, that would be, there wouldn't be any problem there.
Thank you. That's also a recommendation that I made at
Okay.
the last meeting. Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
All right, thank you. Thank you for listening.
Ms. Whitmore.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you so much for being here.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that you mentioned is something that we had talked about, maybe with one of the solicitors a couple months ago, but the idea, I like both you and your son's idea of sort of this regional approach, right? So in other words, and I think Representative Ott is correct, if we increased the overall number of the panel such that maybe it was, I don't know, 15 people, I'm making that number up, but something larger, so that smaller groups could rotate through and screen, right? So now I don't know who I'm being screened by and they don't know who they're screening. So, and I guess I'm pushing back on the idea, just like the Builders Commission has builders on it because they know the subject, I do think there's some benefit to having lawyers who practice in this area and understand, temperament and rulings and things.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to do is find a way to mitigate the problem you're talking about without completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right, yeah, there should be
Is
some
some
lawyers
kind
in
of-
it, yeah.
Right, so if we had something where, smaller groups sort of met with the person, would that address some of the concerns you have in terms of the conflicts? If
I
they
think-
didn't know who they were screening and vice versa?
I think so.
Okay.
I think it would. Well, yeah, we were just taking the 10 members that
Yeah,
is already
right.
in there now and going with that.
Right,
so-
right, no,
But,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely,
But yeah,
okay.
that would be, yeah.
Well,
I mean,
see, we're
this-
gonna come up with a solution.
There's a
here.
lot of discussion. I know there's a lot of people want to talk too, but there is a lot of room for discussion on this. This is not an easy problem to fix to everybody's satisfaction. I know that.
Agreed, appreciate you, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, sir. Appreciate
All
it. Lisa Dowdy? No clapping, Lisa.
Somehow I knew you were going to say that. Thank you for showing me grace. This
Yes,
is my
ma'am.
first time.
Thank you for being here.
So, but my heart went out to the gentleman as he spoke about his relationship with his daughter. Just, just give him a little applaud there. So, thank you all for being here and allowing me to speak on this very, very important subject. My name is Lisa Dowdy. I am a resident of Lexington County. I am also a member of the official Lexington County Republican Party. I serve as the Eastern District Chair over many, many precincts, and I'm also the president of my precinct in Pineview. Hello, Mr. Wooten. So what I wanted to talk to you about today specifically was the magistrate selection process. While their judges are typically appointed by the governor with Senate confirmation, the actual process, I think, has some problematic issues to it. So in practice, the governor can only nominate someone who is first recommended to him by the state senator or senators representing that county, where the magistrate will serve. So this rule effectively gives control over the magistrate selection by just one or two senators. And that seems to be imbalanced because they're serving in the same county. So we suggest, as the people of the official Lexington County Republican Party, that the senators and the House representatives serving the county should be removed from that selection process. They should not be a part of it, so that the governor can properly appoint magistrates with the legislative House and the Senate. And they would have a confirmation of it without interference. So while no bill has yet been filed to do this, the governor should be provided with two candidates also for his selection, one from the Senate and one from the House. And also, I agree with and echo some of the other statements that were made that if the legislator is an attorney that's going to be coming before these magistrates, that they should restrain from the selection process. Okay, that was one point. And then the other point that I wanted to make, and I have 39 seconds, is the closing the gap that the magistrate holdover is when the magistrates are only supposed to serve for 4 years. And the gap in the law has allowed many to stay on the bench 10 to 20 years beyond that 4. And this was reported by the nerve. I don't know if you're familiar with the nerve. You are, okay. You touched a nerve there. According to the state law, a magistrate serves for 4 years until a successor is appointed. So if a replacement is never appointed, then the magistrate will serve on and on in a holdover status and could be indefinitely. So the answer that we are suggesting is that they would allow the magistrate to serve in a holdover status no more than 2 weeks. And this would give the governor time to make a temporary appointment, and the legislator could give advice and consent for a permanent appointment. And the bill needs to be prepared, including these details. So a magistrate is full-time for 4 years. So what happens coming to the conclusion of the 4 years? What's happening then? Can they be reappointed? Do they have to stop and have a period of not being appointed? And is there a pool of magistrates waiting? So that's basically it. Thank you.
So we appreciate your time. I will tell you, on the magistrates, I feel like in the conversations we've had, we're really just scratching the surface. Like you said, there may be subsequent bills, things that we do. I think our first pass that you'll probably see from this committee is looking at, almost like what the governor announced not long ago, more screening of the magistrates and more qualifications. The speaker, I was trying to pull it up, the speaker in our commission letter to us, probably at this point, we're not battling with the Senate on how you pick magistrates, because I know what you're saying. It's almost like the Constitution says the governor and the Senate approves, and it seems a little upside down.
Yes.
We're probably not here to take that part of the battle today, but we are going to look at magistrates and start to look at that. But that may be an ongoing process. In other words, you may be here again with us before it is over. But do any members have questions of Ms. Dowdy? Mr. Bamberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to get your thoughts on, and the chairman pointed out some key things about magistrates, and we're looking at that. But when it comes to the idea of the governor appointing the magistrates, right, instead of, as it is now, the Senate, I guess part of my concern there is accountability on a local level, right? So, for example, your magistrates in Lexington County, they serve just Lexington County, right? They don't go out into Richland or Kershaw or down to Bamberg where I'm at, right? And likewise at home for me, the magistrates in Bamberg County are not serving the people in Lexington County. And I guess my concern is you have your senators who spend time in their districts, right? And their districts are obviously geographically a lot larger than ours in the House, but I mean, isn't there something very important there, since the magistrates serve, that's like the people's court at home. They serve the people more locally on smaller issues, landlord-tenant disputes, et cetera. I just think there's something to be said there for the closeness from the person making the decision. If you've never been in Bamberg's Family Dollar or to the Little League game, I really don't know that I'd want you picking the magistrate judge that's going to have to deal with all of the people in Bamberg County, if you've never been there, for example. Whereas the senator is more accountable to the local people, because if they pick a bad magistrate, or the people at home, even in Lexington County, the people at home say, look, we're fed up with this magistrate, the senator actually is more accountable to y'all in Lexington than the governor would be, because it's 45 of the counties, So I just want to know, like, if you had any thoughts on that part, local accountability being closer to a senator than, say, the governor, or, politics is what it is. Lexington County is very heavy Republican. If there was a Democratic governor, they probably ain't going to spend a lot of time in Lexington. Just like Republican governors don't spend a lot of time down where I live, right? Just being real, So how does that closeness piece play out? Yeah, Nikki Haley was from Bamberg. I'll throw that out here.
Well, the word that I can think of to answer that is objectivity. A magistrate is a magistrate, no matter where they are, and appointed by the senator and left there, for 10 to 20 years, seems a bit overdue. And so I think that the process has interference here. And I think objectivity would be a thing to say, it doesn't really matter where the magistrate is associative. He has a job to do, no matter what a relationship he has with the senator. And sometimes those relationships may appear to be on the cronyism side. So that's why we were suggesting that there be a legislative input here, confirming it without interference for more objectivity. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Bamberg. For members, just bring your attention, staff, and help me. Article 5, Section 26 concerns magistrates. The governor, bound with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint a number of magistrates for each county as provided by law. It talks about other things, terms of office, but the gist of it is the Constitution says the governor will appoint with the advice and consent of the Senate. As you remember from our instructions from the speakers I shared, we won't be dealing. That's another constitutional foundation there, but there's a lot of room under that to look at different issues like screening qualifications. Mr. Ott is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't even know if I need to ask questions now because you did such a great job of answering Representative Bamberg's questions. But
Thank you.
I guess that what I would ask you, because you didn't really speak to it, you spoke more towards how where the magistrates come from and how they receive their positions. But do you believe that there should be qualifications for a magistrate? And what do you think, in your opinion, the minimum requirements to be a magistrate should be for the state of South Carolina?
Ooh, well, I would look at their Facebook page. I think, well, one of the top is the integrity rather than relationship. And that would be the objectivity also, is that.
I'm talking more.
I'm sorry.
I'm talking more of educational requirements. I think that is what has been discussed a lot. Maybe, I think that we do have our mandatory age for our magistrates that apply just like our judges do. I'm not sure if there's any minimum age requirements for judicial or magistrate candidates, but it's my understanding that to be a judge, you have to have a law degree. So I think a lot of discussion has centered around should there be educational requirements for our magistrates, and I don't think that there is any but to have a college degree. Correct.
The magistrate, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, is my understanding is they have very, very low education standards.
I think it's different. So I don't want anyone to think that. I don't know if I would agree with low.
Oh, well.
But the standard is not as high as a law degree for our judicial candidates.
Right. Well, low is in higher education.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't mean a lack of education.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. But I definitely think that needs to be addressed. Of course, it is a learning curve for them when they come into that position. And I think that some preparation would be excellent and educational standards would be excellent also.
Thank you. Let me ask you this scenario, okay? Because I agree with you. In other words, scenarios that Representative Bamberg pointed out, I have real concerns with. I don't think that what he said is not the case, but I think it's problematic for the reasons that you answered his questions, but also because of where the vast majority of these magistrates live and then also work. And my concern has always been that, if I put myself in the shoes of a magistrate, I would not necessarily want to have to walk down the grocery store aisle and see the person that I may have just, or the family of the person that I just may have, slapped with a huge fine or a jail sentence or any of the above. And I wonder what are your thoughts on saying that a magistrate would have to actually serve in a county other than where he or she would reside? In my mind, that would give them more of the freedom to do exactly what you're talking about, which is objectively look at each case and remove because Representative Bamberg is exactly right. I'm from a small town too, where, you're going to know pretty much everyone that you run into and there's connections. We were taught very early on. Don't ever talking about anybody because the person you talking with is connected to them some way, somehow.
That's right.
So, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as a proposal of saying that the magistrates need to practice and hold court somewhere, maybe an adjacent county to where they live.
I think that's an excellent idea. And thinking about my childhood, my father, I grew up on Long Island. My father said, he was an educator, and he said, I'm not teaching in this town. And he commuted an hour away up to New York, upstate New York. And so he did that every day, an hour commute there and back, because he did not want to be with that same point of walking in the grocery store and having that happen. So I think there is a validity in that. As far as a requirement, that would have to be very specific because there is a commute involved. There's gas or electric. And but that's definitely something to consider.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate your time here
Thank you
today.
all. Have a good day.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wooten, Ms. Dowdy. I spoke too soon. I had Mr. Wooten Yeah, he's probably trying to work on a boat, so we'll let him do it.
Well, I hope I already have hers, Mr. Chairman, but I don't know. We'll talk about that. Ms. Dowdy, one, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming across the river. As always, the things that we deal with in our county and in our state, you're always up on that, and I appreciate your service as well. And just so the committee will know, or just so the folks outside of this committee will know, when you start talking about a bipartisan effort working on these things, as chair of the Republican Party over in Lexington, or your side, know that this is something that's going across party lines. Representative Ott there is a Democrat from Bamberg, or not the Bamberg County, the Calhoun County, and Mr. Bamberg from obviously down in the little country. But my point is that I respectfully, I will disagree with Mr. Bamberg, because as an old trooper, when we would graduate from patrol school, they'd send you to a different part of the state because you were policing the people that you grew up with, and they didn't want you doing that.
Yeah.
So I don't really care, or there again, Mr. Bamberg, respectfully, I don't really care if you've been to my son's ball game or not, as long as you are administering the law the way it should be done. So, Ms. Dowdy, I will speak to you, I'm sure, more about this issue because the magistrate stuff will be coming up
Great.
as we go. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And for the group, I want to tell you, and one of you said it already, but the qualifications currently for magistrate are a 4-year degree and 21 years of age. It used to be, it kind of grandfathered up when they changed the statute, but it, okay, Mr. Tim Messersmith. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. So I've condensed my remarks way down. My name's Tim Messersmith. I'm a resident of Lexington County and a voter. And I want to say South Carolina's judicial selection process is unusual, as you all know. And I think the time for judicial reform is upon us. And I think that's the sense in both the House and the Senate here. And as you're surely aware, higher level state judges are elected by the legislature, but candidates for these seats are screened and nominated by a very small legislative controlled board, the JMSC, right? And the judge selection process is tightly controlled from beginning to end by the legislative branch. That's true, with no input from the governor and little opportunity for public involvement or engagement. I'm going to recommend the legislature consider 3 very specific ways that we can improve South Carolina's judicial selection process. Obviously, it's my opinion, but these 3 recommendations do not require amending the state constitution. Recommendation number 1, see, I'm skipping all my other stuff. Recommendation number 1 is to overhaul the Judicial Merit Selection Commission. The governor should appoint a majority, if not all, of the JMSC's members. And the majority of the commissioners should be members of the public. Additionally, and there will probably be a question on this, lawyer legislatures should be prohibited from serving on the commission to mitigate conflicts of interest. We've talked about that some, but I mean, it just seems like the mother of all conflicts of interest if somebody on the JMSC is presenting a case to a judge that they ran through and recommended. Bills that would address this include S-178 and H-3022. I've reviewed those bills. So just by way of reference, that's how I know y'all are looking at this stuff. H-3022. Recommendation number 2 is to remove or raise the cap on judicial nominees. Doing this would allow more qualified candidates to be considered and allowed to compete for these critical positions. Current state law allow, or maybe not law, but rules, regulation, require the JMSC to only advance up to 3 candidates per vacant judicial seat. And bills that address that are S-130, S-178, and House Bill 3447. Recommendation number 3 is to improve transparency surrounding the screening process. And others have kind of talked about that some. But consider all JMSC hearings be live streamed, okay? Which would be required under H-3932, which was, I think it's a bill I looked at that is pretty much everything live, says everything should be live streamed. Additionally, the 2-week testimony submission requirement should be reduced or removed. It's prohibitive if you don't get your input in 2 weeks ahead of time. In summary, please consider, number one, overhauling the Judicial Merit Selection Commission. Number two, removing or raising the cap on judicial nominees. And number three, improving transparency surrounding the screening process. That's the end of my remarks, Chairman.
Tim, Mr. Messmith, if you could, on the transparency, your sub items under transparency, I was note taking and I'm not very
Live
good
stream?
at multitasking. Live stream?
Live stream.
Okay, all righty.
And either relax or remove the 2-week testimony submission requirement prior to. Yeah, maybe 2 weeks seems excessive.
I got you.
Couple of days so you can plan.
Yes,
seems more reasonable.
It was interesting as you go through, many of the ideas you're saying are things we've
There, I
discussed,
mean,
you know.
yeah, so I was surprised. Yes.
Yeah.
I've got 5 different bills here, 2 in the Senate and 3 in the House that address this to varying degrees. Maybe not exactly as I've stated, but.
And so I think the opportunity, you know, what the ultimate overhaul looks like, you know, I think the cap thing is something we'll be discussing. I think the transparency thing is something, I've been trying to explain to people every time. I've got what I'd like to see the way JMSC. I'm a lawyer legislator, and it'd suit me to not be on it, so you couldn't ever accuse me, you know, but there's different opinions. I said, ultimately, it's going to be like a mediation. You know, I always tell our clients in mediation, they're going to spend more than they want, but you're not going to get as much as you want. And so I see that coming, and I think we're going to make some good progress. So it's oftentimes we have to kind of smile and nod and thank you for coming, but I think we'll really get done some of the things you presented. Any further questions? Mr. Robbins recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Messer-Smith, I just want to thank you for coming and presenting options and speaking to us in a way that is appreciated. And as the chairman said, we may not get to everything that you wanted us to do, but I do appreciate what you presented to us. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else? Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. It threw me with that Slade part. Miss Laura Hudson, as I know, Miss Laura Slade Hudson's recognized.
Good afternoon. I know most of you and most of you know me, but I don't know, and Tommy knows me better than he needs to for years and years. I do run an organization that's statewide that is for crime victims. I have emergency funds 24/7, have attorneys, faith outreach. So we do a lot of things. We've been around for 30 years. So I represent a lot of crime victims. Chairman Pope, I heard all the previous solicitors and whatnot that testified, and everybody talked about the perception. Talked about what's the public's perception. And when I talk to the public, and I do that a lot, the public sees political incest. Judges appointed that have been members of the General Assembly, especially the House Judiciary, their sons, daughters, law partners, wives, political figures. The judiciary looks like a way to reward insiders, inside ball game, true or not. That's a perception. Sometimes perception is reality. That's not to say that some of the appointments are not worthy judges. I'm not here to bash individuals, although that's a temptation, only to point out flawed system. I agree with many of the comments were made by others. I've looked at 22 bills that have been pre-filed, are already filed, and I understand there's a lot more coming down. Representative Ott and Cobb Hunter, I really like your bill. Most of those deal with, all candidates being reviewed, not just 3. No lawyer legislators on the JMSC. The governor would have some appointing ability. Citizens committed. That committee, Citizens Committee, is appointed by the Senate and the House. So I mean, it gets worse that there's too much legislation control over what's going on. Several of the bills give more power to that committee of citizens. Actually puts one of them on the committee. term limits, caps, more input, from other people. And I, would be supportive of that. And we've heard all this and we've beaten a dead horse about it. But, and I'm confident from what I've seen of the 22, bills that have been introduced that everybody's honing in on what we'd like to see. I want to concentrate on the magistrate system. The latest that I've heard from the court is that about 85% of all the litigation in the state takes place in the lower courts. That's important. It's important that people have their, that are magistrates have their hands on the pulse of their community. Even though there may be a better way to do that. I don't know how many of you have followed along on the magistrates through the years. Of course, I've been doing this for 40 years. So I see it swing this way, swing that way. There's a section 22-119 of the magistrate's law that it creates an advisory council on magistrate eligibility and certification, examination, and continuing education membership. My group is on that. I have never been to one of these committees. I have never been called to participate. I talked to our Sheriff's Association and other people that are mentioned in this law. They've never been asked to do anything. We're supposed to be submitting an annual report to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court about what we think about magistrates. There's nothing in the bill though that says who calls a meeting. There's nothing that says that who is their secretary, to go with it, that's going to put all this together. It just makes this committee. And I'm assuming, Representative Ott, that you looked at some of this when you were making your bill, because it includes a lot of individuals that are not on the JMSC, like prosecutors, like crime victims. We did last year put in a crime victim on JMSC, a good one. It's important that all the stakeholders are included in some way. It's not the criminal's justice system. It's the citizens' justice system. And we have to be careful that we don't let it be inside ball game. And I appreciate being able to come here today and speak to you. I was a little miffed that crime victims' attorneys were not included in the first hearings, because we feel like we are a part of the judicial system, not just the public. And my attorney, my chief counsel, could not be here today. She had already made all of her plans before we knew when this meeting was taking place. But I'm sure she's capable of writing you some of her issues. And that's basically all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Hudson. A couple things. One, we actually ran across that 22-119, and I was like you. I was going, well, this may be the answer to our whole section 3, of the magistrate stuff. But right. If you recall, as much like the docketing committee and many others we've served on over the years, and so it may be something on 22-119 that this committee may look at as part of our recommendations. Right. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, right, but just kind of ask the Chief Justice to get the band back together, so to speak. Right. So I also want to share from the Citizens Committee members in your materials, and those that didn't take your book home like I did should have them in your book. The rest of us is electronically. Nancy Jo Thomason is an attorney up in Greenville that chaired the Citizens Committee for that region. And she indicated in great detail the value that she sees in the Citizen Committee, because we're looking, can we do things for the candidate's sake to bring Citizen Committee and the Bar Committee together to make sure that element's there, but also make sure it's efficient, again, so you're not doing the same thing twice. So I just have to name these things when I write them down. You brought it up, so I want to share with them. Mr. Ott's recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hudson, thanks for being here.
Yes, sir.
We haven't had really any conversations regarding this issue. So it's good to be able to have that conversation. I'm gonna try not to show my fear of you at this particular point. I've heard, and I got you to laugh, so mission accomplished.
I'll accept respect.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Respect's a better word. Well, let's talk about respect. That's where I was going to go first. I do hate that it seems like this process has gotten down to a point, I think, over the course of many months and time where we paint with this really broad brush, right? I really am coming at this from both sides. I think there's been some unfairness levied from whatever perspective or side that you find yourself, on. So, I mean, we have good judges in the state, correct?
We do.
Right.
We have a couple of them that would, I wouldn't say were, but most of them are good.
Well, and that's what gets people though, right there, is that hint at, there's some bad ones. And
One
then-
bad
but-
apple.
I'm with you, but what that does is that plants that seed of, well, I wonder who is it?
Yeah.
Well, now somebody that gets caught up in that legal system, right? Well, do I have that bad judge that I have, been told is out there, and am I going to get a fair shake? And I think we actually can do ourselves harm when we don't address it from a perspective of no. I mean, the vast majority of our judges are great ethical judges. I think that
I agree with that.
right, and I believe I think that when a judge is found to be qualified and nominated, they are absolutely qualified. I don't know that I've seen any candidate come through this process that I don't think was qualified to be a judge. Now, would I vote for them based off of information? That's up to the body. But nevertheless, we're going to put that aside. We have good, ethical lawyer legislators, correct?
For the most part.
Right. But again, that's important to say so that we aren't painting with a broad brush and insinuating to the public that if you are a lawyer legislator in South Carolina, you are a bad person. You are corrupt to the core, because that is not the case. And I think that's important for us to say.
I would agree with that to a certain extent. I think there's some bad apples that have given it a bad name.
Yes, ma'am. And which is why I think it's so important that we say that it's not overarching, that there are.
I would agree with that.
Right. And that's why I just want to put it out there for whoever may be looking. And I think that there is some blame and responsibility. I mean, I have poured into this issue like a lot of folks have, right?
Right.
And I've learned so much. I think that a lot of times, do you think it's human nature sometimes when you don't get what you want, that you look for an excuse?
Sure.
Or you point and you blame sometimes whatever you can find to justify in our own human minds that we got short-ended. We got the short end of the stick.
Maybe.
And I think that we have to try to, push back against that possibility sometimes. So, here's what I've struggled with.
Okay.
There's been a lot of accusations, and I cannot thank our victims advocates enough. Right?
Thank you.
I've seen them. I know the work
They're
that y'all
awesome.
do. I really, I've got personal friends that work in that. I don't know how they deal with it, with what they see, how they hold things together for these victims and for these families. But we've got a lot of victims out there, right? We don't
More than defendants.
Yes, ma'am. We don't always, though. Do we put our judges sometimes in untenable positions when perhaps we have a prosecutor or a solicitor that might make recommendations to the judges that would be contrary to what the family and the victim's advocate would recommend to the judge? What is a judge supposed to do in that situation?
Well, crime victims know that prosecutors do not represent them.
Excuse me?
They represent the state. And
Correct.
I'm constantly telling crime victims that the prosecutor is not your attorney and they represent the state. So there's going to be conflict many times. The judge is a trier of the fact. That's why we want the crime victim to be able to speak and to be, present and have elocution in a courtroom. They have to listen to all of it. And we would love to have crime victims have their own attorneys. Well, I only have 7 of them, and they are drinking out of a fire hose.
No, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
But there are those situations, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where
It's not the same.
solicitor and prosecutor may recommend a bond or a sentence. that might be less than what is requested by the family.
Right.
And I don't know.
The prosecutor has the final say. He has to consult with the victim, but he does not have to do what they want.
Correct. But do you think that sometimes we can unfairly bash a judge that does not go with what the victim's advocate or family is asking / representing or requesting, and then ends up going with the solicitor or a prosecutor's recommendation? That, I guess where I'm going is solicitors and prosecutors have a huge responsibility as well in this process.
Sure.
By doing their homework and making sure that they are in contact with the families and the victim's advocate. Because if not, and if they're just rolling through things very quickly, then a lot of times, and a judge is trying to go through these cases, might not have evidence in front of them, might be a guilty plea, right?
Right.
That was entered into between the prosecution and the defendant. Judge might not have the opportunity to look at the evidence. And so now we're just being presented with a guilty plea. We've got to make a ruling. And then later on down the road, something happens. That person that pled guilty, or the judge accepted the recommendation of the prosecutor or the solicitor, they do something else later on down the road. And then what do? Sometimes we go right back to what that judge may or may not have sentenced them to and say, well, what is that person doing out on our streets?
And that happens a lot.
And I guess that's all I'm trying to make sure that we are all coming at this from true intentions, not to bash one side or the other, Mr. Chairman, but to accept responsibility where we all need to accept responsibility to make this system better and more fair for the citizens.
Well, in my 40 years of being down here, I'm old. I'm going to be 80 in 2 weeks.
Oh, you don't look it though, Ms. Hudson.
I look 100, right?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
I always like that statement. I like to think of St. Paul saying, not only do we not do bad, we don't give the appearance of doing bad. And I think that's what we're trying to solve here.
I could not agree more. Thank you for that. Just want to throw one more about the magistrates out there at you. I would ask for you to go back and talk with your folks. I'm kind of rolling this out a little by little as far as what we talked about earlier, Mr. Chairman. We have these judges, right? These circuit court judges that go around and operate within that circuit. Y'all take a look at maybe having our magistrates operate that way as well. Perhaps to maybe be appointed from within a judicial circuit, perhaps, where they could be moved around also and serve within different localities.
That's not a bad idea.
We have backlogs or something like that. Okay, sounds good. I just ask you to take that into consideration.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Right.
Every time we talk, Mr. Hott, I think of another issue. So one, I want to thank Ms. Hudson. And I'm coming to you, Mr. Robbins. I want to thank Ms. Hudson because I've been with her about 30 of those 40 years, and I know she could have cut with a lot sharper blade than she did. So I certainly appreciate it. One thing I think that keeps coming up with the magistrates, and I was thinking about this earlier testimony, we run into the whole county funding of magistrates and kind of the unfunded mandate. Mr. Ott used it, for example, I was thinking, and same thing happened to me with solicitors. I had solicitors in York, and Union didn't really provide any. So I'm kind of taking York employees to Union, and it became, because that was my more affluent county and my other county. And so that's just something, I'm just throwing that out again while the, stream of consciousness while it's popping in my head. The magistrate thing, the bigger issue, even when we talk about lawyer magistrates, I think there's a lot of merit to that. You then have to make pay commensurate with it. Who's going to do it, Calhoun County or the state? And so, Mr. Robinson, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to say that before y'all get too far down this road of magistrates serving in other counties, you might want to talk to your county councils before you start doing that. Ms. Hudson, thank you so much for coming.
Yes,
and I've always admired your tenacity as an advocate for your causes, and as Mr. Ott said, I even am scared to even ask you a question sometimes, but I need to
my.
ask a couple. And I guess the first one I would ask is, when you said that you think there are a couple of bad judges, is it because you believe that they are not qualified to be judges, or is it because they may have philosophies on the bench and they may have levied sentences that you don't agree with?
Now, it's interesting. I'm glad you asked that question, because most of the complaints that I get from crime victims is not about the sentence. It's about the demeanor of the judge.
Okay.
There are judges, very few, that will roll their eyes, that will blow, that, it's obvious they're bored, or they don't, they're making, some sort of, it's just, and that's why the Citizens Committee is so important to this JMSC, because they are more in a position to say, this guy doesn't have judicial demeanor. I mean, I'd make a terrible judge. I'm so sarcastic. I mean, I'd be awful. It's just demeanor.
Yeah.
And when I say that they're bad, I won't say they're a bad judge, but they don't come up to the standard of behavior that I think we need to expect from a judge.
Gotcha. All right. And I can tell you that today versus when I was a young lawyer, that demeanor situation's gotten a whole lot better. But I do understand where you're coming from,
Right.
and I think that's the worst thing. And I can go back to my days as a prosecutor, just as Mr. Pope has prosecuted, that the worst thing you can do is make somebody feel like they've been disrespected.
Right.
And so I would hope that, being the dean of victim advocacy as you are, that you could have the opportunity at some point to tell any judge that was exhibiting bad demeanor that, hey, you might want to think
I write
about.
them really nice letters.
Gotcha. All right. All
And
right.
I make complaints to the Chief Justice.
Point number two.
Yes, sir.
To the idea that citizens, non-lawyers, should serve on the JMSC, and back to this appearance of impropriety argument that you make and that some others have made, and I want to quote my good friend Representative Thigpen: influence is going to be there no matter what. You cannot get influence out of any political environment. But if you were to appoint a citizen, and let's just use an example, you've got a local businessman or woman who owns a local business, or is an employee of a big corporation, and they are placed on the JMSC. Would that person then, if their company was a plaintiff or a defendant in a circuit court in South Carolina, would that person, as a member of the JMSC, be prohibited from going in front of the judge that they put on the bench, or any judge for that matter?
That's a good question, because there's always going to be, as you say, some influence coming from no matter what we do.
So I take that as do you believe that would be a problem?
I do. I think it would be a problem, and that's why the governor needs to do the appointment, let y'all off the hook.
Well, but if the governor appoints a citizen, that doesn't change the fact that you've got a citizen in front of that judge. And so I'm trying to distinguish between this argument that lawyer legislators should not be on JMSC because they appear before these judges, and some may and some not. I don't think y'all are taking into consideration there could be a non-litigation attorney on the JMSC, but it's not going to change any if Joe Businessman is on the JMSC and he's going in front of this judge when his company is being sued.
Yeah, but his attorney is going in front of that judge, and that's a vast difference between that and practicing law in front of the judge.
Well, no, not necessarily. And to the folks that want to have judges run political campaigns, what if the corporation is donating to the judge? Is that a problem?
Are you talking about general elections?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, I'm totally against that.
Me too. But my point is,
Nelson Mullen would own all of them.
You've got I'm not gonna go there. You've got a corporation though that is before the court that is on the JMSC. Is that not a situation where that's a problem?
Well, if somebody, I see a big difference of, my company is in common pleas and we're, I know the judge and blah, blah, blah. But, I think that's different than an attorney practicing in front of and getting
Okay.
special privilege, which I have seen happen many, many times.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bamberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one thing I think, to consider, particularly with regards to the masterpiece is, what Representative Ott brought up about the circuit and things like that. I think from the victim standpoint, and some people may not know that I grew up in a law enforcement household 30 years, right? My whole life.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, so I've seen what actually about as close as you can get from actually putting on a uniform is living in the house with somebody who had to do it every day. And I think it's lost on some folks that the victims and the arrests that they want to see happen, most of the time, and a lot of times, the search warrants, the arrest warrants, those are all things that are signed at night.
Yep.
Right? So imagine if you live on the side of Bamberg County where I do, and they have eyes on this person they've been looking for that hey, we see the guy that murdered we know he's in this house. Oh, wait, our magistrate doesn't live here. We got to drive 50 minutes to an hour to Aiken.
Good point.
Get it signed, drive 50 minutes to an hour back, in 2 hours they're gone in the wind. And now you have a victim who's heartbroken because the chance was missed. So I think there's a lot more to it than
Well, I think that could be worked out.
Just
by
higher
having,
level,
because
you
you've
know.
got several magistrates in a county. So, I mean, you just,
correct. It's all a part of the general context of looking at everything.
Right.
Because we wouldn't want to cut off our nose to spite our face in certain
Right.
regards. And thank you too for appearing today. And I promise you don't look 100 at all. I hope I age as well as you have. Thank you
it's
so
from being
much.
down here in the General Assembly.
I was thinking you sound like Eddie Haskell talking about you look lovely, Mrs. Cleaver, but I'm dating myself saying that. Ms. Thayer's recognized.
First of all, after this is over, let's talk skincare. Clearly, you know a secret. I like that they said that you were the Dean of Victims Advocates, because certainly you are, and we appreciate all your hard work on that.
Thank you.
We talked about, or you talked about, a judge's demeanor. And I'm just curious, have you ever reported that?
Yes.
And if so, was there a response? Did you feel like there was an outcome from that, or that was just ignored?
From the Chief Justice, I think it was not ignored at all.
Okay. But that judge is still there, maybe perhaps reprimanded or what have you. So I guess one of the things that I'm trying to get at is, do you feel like we have issues maybe with the judges that are already sitting there and we're not doing a good job when they come up to be reappointed, that we're not doing a good enough job there? Is that more of what the issues you see? Or do you feel like these are newer judges that have recently been appointed and sitting on the bench?
Oh, that's a hard question because I'm having to think of individuals. Sometimes, and Tommy will know who I'm talking about, so I need to be careful. Getting rid of a sitting judge is difficult. I don't care what they've done.
Okay.
It's very difficult to get rid of them. And that brings up another point of we need to make it easier for crime victims and citizens to register complaints. There needs to be a website that says, this is how you do this. It's very intimidating to somebody who doesn't know the criminal justice system. An average citizen has had Civics 101 and it ain't South Carolina
Right.
You know, so they, you know, are intimidated that they have to do, a written, you know, complaint, that they have to go through the process, and then several times, well, I can think of two, where they didn't feel like they were properly heard by the GMSC. There was a certain amount of arrogance that was there. Well, you're just a private citizen. You're not an attorney. You don't know what you're talking about. That can be an issue. Do we need to have a review? Yes. The judge that our crime victims did get rid of several years ago really had some medical issues that were not being recognized. He had not been approved by the bar. He had failed it, and he was still sitting.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that was a difficult thing for me to get involved in. My husband would call me the Chinese water torturess, you know. That's sometimes what you have to do. But yeah, I'm trying to answer your question. I do think that there are occasions where somebody has been seated who was doing a fine job and then they didn't. And that, you know, there needs to be a review process.
Right, right. I mean, I guess that's, you know, just from the outside looking in, and certainly I'm not in a courtroom every day as a non-attorney, but just maybe more of a review process of the judges that we have sitting there. So anyway, I just wondered if you agreed with that statement. Okay.
I do.
Thank you, and thank you for all that you do.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Thigpen.
Thank you so much for sharing such candid responses, and we do hope that not only your wisdom, you know, flows and overflows in the cup that we have here, but also your grace and beauty, as you stated your age and how well you look for. We heard. We heard in testimony in past hearings about, you know, judicial legitimacy being made up of competence, impartiality, and independence. And we've heard a lot today about cases where individuals believe they were harmed because of the improper actions of judges. When we ask that question of competence, independence, and impartiality, when we start talking about influence and the appearance or perception of wrongdoing, that comes into the impartiality thing.
Right.
Do you think that's more based on the person and their character or ethics, or do you think that is a systemic problem that we have, that something that we need to address within the system?
Well, I don't know how exactly to address that in the system, but do I think that it's a problem individually? Yes. You know, a prosecutor should be a lonely person. He can't have many friends. It's true. You can't play golf with just everybody. You know, it's a lonely job because you don't want to give the impression of impartiality. And I think an individual has to be aware of that.
Right.
I see more of that at the magistrate's level than I do at circuit court.
Okay. The second part is, you know, as we talk about, I don't think there's an issue with competence. I think you may have mentioned one at the very end, that competence. But I think credentials, education, qualifications, I think we check that box. But when it comes to independence, because that's what I'm trying to balance here. So, you know, we talk about, I think the first gentleman talked about judges who repeatedly had done things wrong according to, you know, there was no evidence. There was just, you know, his testimony. Independence is the ability to insulate judges from fear of being threatened or removed, or you better judge this way or else. And so on one hand, we want to allow a judge to be able to, you know, make a judgment without any fear of repercussions for that judgment.
That's right.
But at the same time, we want to weed out individuals who, or reprimand individuals who are not up to standard. And so how do you have, or can you speak to how we balance both wanting to insulate and not have judges be under the threat, but at the same time, those who may not have the demeanor, or those who may not necessarily be executing their duties as they should? How do we balance that?
Well, I think some of the bills address that by staggering terms, by the person who seated you is not going to reseat you. So I think those things that's a good idea. And I think that would help.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Thigpen, that, I'm talking about my buckets all the time. That's one that the staggering of terms
Yeah.
and, term limits and trying to make sure that I couldn't preside over your judgeship twice in a row
Yeah.
is something that will be in that bucket when we get there. Let's see. Who's next? Mr. Bailey, and then I'll get Mr. Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hudson, I'm kind of one of the non-lawyers, but spent many years in law enforcement dealing
Yes,
with
sir.
victims. So I appreciate what all you've done for the state of South Carolina, especially those victims out there. But I hear you, and I hear many of the people in the audience talking about how we need to set up this new system and the changes we need to make. And I always fall back to, and talking to my colleagues here, it really doesn't, and see if you agree, it really doesn't matter what system we end up with if we don't have the proper grievance process.
Right.
And we don't have the proper enforcement tools to make sure that misconduct's not occurring in the courtroom, we're wasting our time.
That's true.
So they kind of go hand in hand. So if we don't make this a whole layout of how we're going to conduct ourselves in the courtroom, along with making sure we get the right judges there and how we do that, then this whole process is going to be a failure. And I just want to make sure my colleagues know that we got to make sure that the individuals we put in courtrooms as judges, and you all are confident that they're going to be held accountable if there's misconduct. And I think that's the premise of how we got here today, is that a lot of people that you talk to that have been in the courtroom don't trust the system. And I don't think that there's a lot of things that are going wrong. I just think we're not being transparent, and we don't have a proper grievance process where people feel like their voices are being heard. So I appreciate your time, and I look forward to working with my colleagues here to come up with an answer of what it needs to look like when we get finished. But you all participating is very important, and thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Whedon, I'm going to give commentary between every question. So I looked up, there is a website on how to register complaints with the court, but, and that's, the link on the Judicial Department website for ODC that would apply to both judges and lawyers. I think the difficulty in that is that, as many of you know, at least the attorneys know, the ODC process is very closed until you get to a certain level. And it works both ways, because the advantage is if I'm just mad at you and it's really not an issue, I don't besmirch your reputation or
Right.
your career. So that's something we can explore too, that would exist maybe in what we're calling our wraparound services with judges, and one of my many buckets, Mr. Thigpen. But that may be something that we could look at in conjunction with that too. Mr. Wooten's recognized.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and Ms. Hudson, I will not get out of here with everybody else sucking up to you without telling you that she is my constituent. And for my entire time in Lexington, I've watched this beautiful lady riding around in a convertible Camaro with the late, great Bobby Earl. And you should see when that hair down and the convertible's down and it's flowing. So, Ms. Hudson, I just wanted to say thank you again for coming and all you do. We've worked together on many things, and this will be one of them. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Mr. Newton is never going to let me preside again. This thing's gone so far in the ditch, but thank you.
I've got my galoshes on.
Yeah.
Let me get.
Miss Ginger Dunn is recognized. Miss Dunn. Miss Dunn, if you give her your name and the county you're from. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. My name's Ginger Dunn, and I'm a resident of Horry County. Would it be okay if I ask a question? Would it? How many of the panel are lawyers?
I've outed myself. I'm a lawyer. That's how Laura knows me all these years.
So 6 looks like. And I'm sorry, I just had one other question. Why do you think you were selected for this committee?
I think I was selected because the speaker always looks somebody that'll do something, and I always volunteer because I'm the speaker pro tem.
So y'all all volunteered, is that?
Yeah, nobody was forced to be on the committee that I'm aware of. Well, Mr. Caskey's in the military, so volunteering is somewhat of a loose question. They got appointed by the speaker, but again, I've been a prosecutor, I've been in civil practice, and I'm here in the legislature now. So, yes, ma'am.
I've never been in any kind of litigation, and I knew next to nothing about politics up until 2021. I'm not a public speaker. I'm nervous doing this, but there's no verdict in my case. I'm not a disgruntled litigant. I have no problem with anything anybody's ruled. I'm involved in a family court case that's extended out to federal court, civil court. Got probate things going on now. It's all over. I think that there are some cases that are exceptional to most of the rules. And when a crooked case comes along, it brings everybody out of the woodwork. When I realized what was happening to me, first of all, I'm a small business owner. My husband and I opened the Melting Pot restaurant in Myrtle Beach 25 years ago. We have family-owned businesses, and just always been in the hospitality industry. And it's only since all this started that I took an interest in government. I didn't know most of the laws. I had no idea how judges were picked. Didn't care to know. I have no political leanings one way or the other. For a year and a half now, I put my case on the back burner because I knew there was nothing I could do. And I've done nothing but research and try to understand why these things were happening. And I knew that the time would come, if I ever got an opportunity to speak to anybody, it would be unbelievable. So I started researching cases like mine. And to speak to the topic, the agenda today, one of the things that I found, and I thought if I only had 3 minutes, I wanted to make it important. One of the cases I found, this is a picture of this lady. I don't know if you can see it from there. Her name is Martha Lewin Argo. She was married to an assistant attorney general in South Carolina. His name was George Argo. He was in the attorney general's office for 16 years. She's 81 years old now. Title 44, Chapter 17, Section 410. It was signed on June 5th, 2005. That was a Friday. It was signed by Governor Mark Sanford. I went through this bill, and this is because of what's happened to me. I had so many lawyers that did not work for me. I could not believe what I was witnessing was possible. I just could not believe it. And every time there was a roadblock, I would go look up the statute, and it was like the statute was written to enable this thing that had happened. So on June 5th, when this bill was signed, that was a Friday, the exact changes in this bill, this amendment, I did columns and highlighted the things that had been changed and added. This is a bill about admitting someone involuntarily for mental health. And the exact changes, line by line, enabled Mr. Argo to send police. He and his wife were having marital problems. She was going to divorce him, and she had the money she had inherited from her parents. She lives in Orangeburg. Police picked her up from her home on Monday, on June 6th. So the changes to this bill wouldn't have been common knowledge. It would have been signed on a Friday. It changed the time that you could get examined from 24 hours to 72 hours. Normally, when someone's committed involuntarily, there's some inciting event. Something happens. Someone's called the police, they're in the hospital. If someone's considered a danger to themselves, something has happened. There's evidence of it. For Miss Argo, there was no evidence. There was nothing wrong with her. So they needed a longer time frame to be able to commit her. She was committed against her will and held for 47 days. She was drugged. Because her litigations have gone on, there's one still open. She's been in every court. She's been at the Supreme Court twice. And she was transferred to Darlington County in front of a Judge Marvin Lawson, who was friends with Mr. Argo. It was only because of the changes in these bills they were able to hold her. And it was only prior to that, a judge couldn't assign outpatient care from the bench. He assigned a year outpatient care for her where she had to go receive injections. To this day, I read all the depositions. There's over 3,000 pages on the appellate court site. They gave her injections. First of all, before she appeared before Judge Marvin Lawson, she was injected with something 5 minutes before she walked in. I read her deposition. She said she had to concentrate not to slide into the floor. She was sent back to the facility. Her insurance company was charged over $500,000 for care she did not need. And then for a year, she was forced by court order to go get injections. She lived with an abusive alcoholic. She testified that prior to that, she was fast enough to get away from him, but she was not. Lawyers took everything from her entire estate. The last thing I can see on the docket is her home was foreclosed. If she was the only one like this bill was proposed by, I didn't know who Jim contempt charges against me based on me not having a transcript to show what they were saying wasn't true. There are over 1,000 counts of perjury in my case with evidence, with proof. No one will look at it. No one will look.
Yes, yes, ma'am. I was we've run out of time.
I'm sorry.
But I was trying to be respectful and let you kind of come in. Mr. Vanberg's got a question, I believe.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out and clarify, excuse me, I think you said your case was still open.
Mhm.
If you still have an open case, and there are still things going on in it, can't tell you what to do. But you may not want to talk about certain stuff tied to the case if it's open, just because everything you say here is public and on record and
Oh,
things, and it may
I'm-
be, anything can be used in a case, et cetera. And I just wanted to throw that out there, for out of, just
One of the
letting
things
you
I
know.
observed was how often people, the immediate way to discredit somebody is to say they're disgruntled. They're not happy with the verdict. And then people don't want to listen. And I knew, it's not like I didn't try. I had been pro se. I couldn't get, and none of the attorneys I've had will even give me my file. I've never even gotten a file back from any of them. They wouldn't serve discovery. And I'm somehow expected to go into a final trial.
And I think ethically, they're bound to give you your file
But
if you
no one will
request it.
make them. I contacted the ODC
Mhm.
when I did not get to speak on November 6th. I sent an email that night that said, I received 2 versions finally of this same transcript. I sent emails to say, can you confirm, because I don't want to submit a false document somewhere. And this was the warning that I kept getting. And I sent the email that said, I'm scared to turn this transcript in because this is the evidence of what's happened here. I want to know that which one's real.
Sure. And let me tell you, I want to be very respectful of your testimony. I want to remind you too, that this committee can't intervene or attempt to impact.
And I
know you're
understand.
not asking us to, but the overarching theme of kind of judicial corruption was what I was hearing from you. Is there any questions in that regard? And again, I'm trying to be very respectful for your circumstance, but we can't talk about your specific.
I could speak to what he was saying about the corporate people in that scenario where you've got someone with a business. How would that work in with the,
Right.
I've been looking at that a good bit. I don't think that that's an apples to apples scenario, because if you own a corporation, you own a business, and then you have a litigation, well, of course, the judge would be recused from that. It's, and continuity wise, the corporation is not going to be, hopefully not in lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. That's a one-time thing. So you would have to take that on a case-by-case basis.
Any further questions for Ms. Dunn? Any kin to Jim Dunn?
No.
He was the solicitor down there for years, so thank you for your time, Ms. Dunn. We appreciate it. Pamela Godwin? Welcome, Ms. Godwin.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee, for letting me share with y'all today. We, the people of the official Lexington County Republican Party, we would like to see a majority of both chambers to elect judges. The South Carolina House and Senate meet in a joint session to elect high-level judges. The problem is that candidates only need a majority of votes from the joint group of lawmakers voting that day. That is too much voting power for the House, almost 3 times the amount. In fact, it is possible for House members to elect a judge without a single vote from the other side. This needs to change. The answer to this issue is requiring that judicial candidates have majority of votes from both House and Senate to get elected. I believe that Senate Bill S-130 that Tim mentioned earlier covers most of the above could use a couple of improvements, but that's what I wanted to share today.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it. I always laugh that, the Senate won't pass, give up the magistrates, and the House probably won't pass, give up the vote. But does anybody
Probably.
have any questions in that regard? You understand, again, she's talking about, for those of y'all that were out in the room, she was discussing that you'd have to win both houses, Mr. Ott, as opposed to the majority of the combined houses. And that's when I made my tongue-in-cheek comment about the House. Any question? Mr. Caskey?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ms. Calvin, appreciate you being here. I definitely don't want to argue about this, but I feel some responsibility as a member from Lexington County to acknowledge that there is a dispute with respect to what group of folks are part of the official GOP of Lexington County, which you've represented. I understand you take one position with respect to who is the official GOP. The state party has ruled contrary to your position, and I feel some obligation to highlight that for our members here today. It is not a great state of affairs in Lexington in this regard, but I do think it's important to make sure that the record is clear. So with respect, I just want to highlight that.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. When I lived in Red Bank, we were all just Republicans, and it was a lot simpler back then. So I appreciate
It's
it. Yes,
definitely
ma'am.
not simple in Lexington.
Yes, ma'am.
And I can tell you that I am the legal duly elected chairwoman with no recall provision in Lexington County. And the other party is just elected in fake splinter group elections. So Micah, thank you for bringing that up. And I am happy to address that as well.
Thank you. I think I'll leave that to our Lexington County members because we deal with similar things in York County. It's nice in Bamberg, isn't it, Mr. Bamberg? So, yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
No,
We've
it's
all got our
everywhere.
share. Anybody? Yeah. Yeah. Anybody got any further questions? Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your
Thank
time.
you
and
very
I'm taking
much.
notes. Thank you very much. Molly Vick. Molly? Hi. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm Molly Vick. I'm from Charleston County. And hopefully I am the delightful end of today for y'all. It's been kind of a long afternoon. I feel very grateful to be following everyone up because everyone's touched on what I have written down in my bullet points. So I'm not going to keep you for too long. As far as the panel is concerned, I do have one thing I would like you to maybe just think about, and I'm not a lawyer, I have no background. This is just simply me throwing some brainstorming into the air for y'all in a way that I think might be helpful. And I'm not going to kill you with the legislator stuff. And ironically, I had a city prosecutor about a year ago when I was asking him, like Mr. Ott said, which is super ironic. So a little bit ago, I had written down human nature to speculate, to find a reason for perceived mistreatment, right? So I was talking to this prosecutor and he was patient enough to talk to me for like a lot longer than he probably needed to. And he kept saying legislation, legislation, legislation. And as a victim, I was like frazzled. I'm like, that really doesn't mean anything to me. Like, I just feel like completely kind of left in the dust at the time, but now I'm here. So I took the time to really look into what he was saying, and I did go to one of the JMSC hearings in November. Not really sure what I know what happened with that, but I don't really know what happened with that, which goes back to the transparency issue. And I do have a question / request as far as judges having complaints made against them. Like, I have not personally done that. I was just a little nervous to hear the amount of complaints that I think this candidate, and I don't know how many, I don't have facts behind this. It just appeared that a lot of people had complained against him. And I'm wondering if there's a point in time where if the same complaints are being made or the same subject matter is being brought up, how that can be addressed before it gets to the point where people are feeling like Mr. Ott said, it's not personal, but when your life is in jeopardy or like you've lost a loved one, it feels very personal. And I worry that that will compound, right? So like you said, when your mind's made up that your feelings are hurt and that you think it's personal, but then you're hearing more and more things from the public. Like I've had victims come to me personally who I don't know, who have said, you know, this judge let someone out on bond, and I'm not making it about him. I'm just saying, generally speaking, I think the help I could ask from y'all would be maybe more like changing sentencing ranges, if that makes sense. So a lot of the things that I'm hearing from victims are that offenders are bonding out, and then someone will get a $100,000 bond, then a $50,000 bond, and it's just going back and forth, and they feel like lost in the wayside. And so even though some of your circuits don't have any victims advocates employed right now, like there are empty positions, which is terrifying for y'all, terrifying for us. And I'm here for solution-based purposes, I'm not calling anybody out. I just think it would be really helpful to have like mental health professionals maybe introduced to the panel in some way, educators introduced to the panel in some way, maybe a doctor here or there, because I watched y'all argue for 7 hours a couple of weeks ago, and not one person was a doctor. So, and I'm not trying to be rude by any means, it's just kind of like, I think everyone was at a little bit of a loss when you're like, all right, hold on, like we're all thinking the same way. Can we have someone with a different perspective who does have the background that can be helpful to us? So it seems to me at this point like a lot of dead horses are being beat, for lack of a better term. And I can't imagine how, you know, frustrating that must be for y'all. And just from a citizen's perspective, I think maybe incorporating people with a different profession just a little bit. I'm not trying to come in and rip y'all up, and because I don't have the background to be doing that, because I wouldn't know what I was talking about. But I think maybe perhaps additional professional perspectives.
I will tell you a couple things, Ms. Vick. You know, you named transparency. I was trying to make notes. The bond issue. I'm a former prosecutor in one of my 30 other lives. So we have done a lot this year in trying to do for what we call the revolving door for that
Right.
very reason. And you know, unfortunately, we see victims, particularly in domestic violence situations, others where it seems like he beats you home, you know, literally and physically. But so we're working on some of those things. The one thing that's kind of the core of what I was pulling out. Now I do want to have one question for you on the legislation thing that the prosecutor was saying. But one thing, I think we are looking at trying to figure out once somebody becomes a judge, one of the law professors said it to us best. They said, you have to find the balance between independence, so they're not under our thumb or under the committee's thumb, and accountability. And I think that's where we keep trying to dial the dials. And even in talking to the court, I envision that hopefully we can come out with something when somebody becomes a judge, that's not the end of it. You know what I mean? That there's an opportunity, you know, and of course ODC is available, but which is, you know, disciplinary, but like you say, you may not want to pursue it, but you want to kind of go on record of noting this happened, or like Ms. Hudson said, a victim was treated a certain way. So I do think there's some things coming. Mr. Ott has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if it's really a question, Ms. Vick. Just thank you. Don't know you. I just think that it's never lost on me, and I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of my colleagues up here, that we get kind of caught up in our own little bubble a lot of times. And you're right. I guess all I wanted you to say is you're the most qualified person to come and speak. Your perspective is the perspective that we should be focusing on, because unfortunately you have been in the system. Sure, you didn't ask to be there, but you ended up there. And so, you know, I think that's what we have to stay focused on, because that's what we're supposed to be, you know, trying to accomplish, is what is in the best interest of people like you. And I know that it's daunting a lot of times. We forget, you know, as being up here amongst each other, that it's not easy to come and testify. So not only to you, but everyone else in the public, you know, that doesn't have a vested interest on one side or the other. Thank you just simply for coming and speaking to us today.
Thank you so much. And if I can just add a couple of things in response to your great, thank you so much. I really do appreciate
That's
that.
pretty slick how you said in response to my question. Yeah, absolutely.
It was,
Thank you.
I couldn't believe it that I had just written down almost verbatim what he said about, anyway, I'll move on. So in response to the gray area that you were saying with independence and accountability, so I think it would be beneficial also, maybe continuing education certificates for judges. And I mean this with all due respect, I feel like they also need to be checked on too. They can't talk to anybody. They have to be quiet all the time. This is a balanced thing, you know? It's not fair to, and I don't know any of them personally, but I know what it's like to feel silenced and not heard, and like you're making big decisions and, you know, this and that, and there's not really necessarily a network of support for you. So I think it would be beneficial to look at maybe some type of victim service certification or some type of exposure so that it's not just cut and dry pushing dockets.
It's ironic you said that because one of my friends laughs because there's a term in social service talking about wraparound services, all the things you need to make, you know, a better family. And I use that thinking about we need wraparound services for our judges because once we pick them, a lot of time, a lot of effort, you know, like you heard, a lot of them are very well qualified, but maybe they need some help or guidance. And so I'm hopeful that's something this committee can do too.
And I mean, I've experienced really wonderful judges too. So I don't want to come up here and be like, everything is wrong, this is terrible, because it's not black and white like that. And I don't want it to appear that way, but I really appreciate you listening to my personal suggestions. And if there could be like an empathetic therapist with all of you all the time, that would be great. But I know that's, you know, you can't even get victims advocates in some of these circuits. So that's a scary place to be.
Mr. Bamberg's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo Representative Ott's sentiments. Thank you for coming. I can tell you're a little nervous.
Yeah.
A little nervous up there.
And I'm a little hungry.
Yeah, we are too. Well, those of us who showed up 30 minutes after, wink, wink. But no, I do want to say thank you for coming. I know it's not easy to stand up there and talk in front of the committee and try to walk a line and express your views without maybe going too far like some people have in the past, etc. I will say that one of the tough parts of being on the committee is trying to take bits and pieces from everyone who has input, and everybody's interaction with the system, depending on how much someone interacts with it, could be good, it could be horrendous, it could be in the middle. You talk to 1,000 people, you're going to have 1,000 different explanations of how they feel or what they experience through the process. I do know that with sentencing, for example, some years back, when I was on criminal laws, we looked at certain sentencing and things like this, and you do have the term like mandatory minimum sentences, and whether those are good or bad, or depending on what crime it's for, etc. And then with the judges, when there is not a mandatory minimum, for example, a lot of that is discretionary, and it ends up being a judgment call based on the judge, right? Some judges have been on the bench a long time, where their viewpoints are kind of, I'll say kind of known, basically, like, hey, this person is harder or this person is lighter. Some people are newer. It all just depends.
If I was a felon, I would definitely not be upset if I was in front of a certain person versus another.
Right. There are those perceptions, right? So in looking at it, we do not have an easy job up here. I know some people will look at it and say like, oh, well, X amount are lawyers and obviously we're going to go one way or not. I think the committee is committed to looking at everything and trying to come up with sound recommendations that take into account, for example, your viewpoint and reading between the lines there. I get it. Okay. But take into account that as well as testimony from other victims, from people who've been litigants, et cetera. And thank you for coming up and testifying in front of us. It's truly appreciated.
Thank you. And lawyers are really important. Lawyers are really important. So definitely, like, you're very necessary. So I do not agree with all of you being stripped away. That would be.
Folks wonder why I smile so much, and it's because so many ambulance chasing jokes and things like that. I'm like, I got to give people some reason to like me, you know.
Well, I appreciate y'all for being here, and I didn't feel the need to go into my personal traumas and tribulations, because while everyone does have very valid feelings or thoughts or how perceptions at a time, coming back from that and moving up from that varies from person to person. And I just think, I feel like I have a duty as a victim to other victims who don't feel like they're going to be heard, or who don't feel like they know what to say, or feel left in the dust, or feel alone. And I would just, again, like to be solution-based instead of.
Sound like Ms. Hudson needs to give you an application then.
I think she is royalty, and I will gladly accept. Seriously, I'm so honored to speak after you. And thank you so much for saying everything you said, so that it took so much burden off of me too.
Thank you, Ms. Vick. Thank you for your time. Ms. Lynn Teague.
Thank you very much. Yes, Lynn Teague, and I think most of you know I'm here for the League of Women Voters of South Carolina. The League regards judicial selection as very important, so much so that we conducted a 2-year study of the issue to develop our policy positions. We consulted many individuals who are deeply familiar with the judicial system, including active and retired judges, attorneys, law school professors, and legislators, including at the time the Speaker of the House, chairs of judiciary, and so forth. We used that information as a basis to reach consensus on our positions on judicial selection. And we focused on systemic issues. We were not focused on individual cases. I can summarize our positions as follows. We don't support public election of judges. Experience elsewhere tells us that public election does not achieve the goal of selecting the best qualified individuals to serve on the bench. We recognize that if we do not employ public election, the other 2 major branches of government must handle the selection process. However, our 3 branches of government are intended to be as independent of one another as possible. Each is intended to provide checks and balances for the others. The judiciary must not become a rubber stamp for any other branch. Therefore, while other branches must have a role in judicial selection, that role must be narrowly tailored to achieve the goal of selection of well-qualified jurists. Legislative and executive branch involvement should be limited to what is necessary to achieve the goal. The role of the JMSC in evaluating qualifications does not require legislative or executive branch membership, although we have no problem with appointment by legislature or executive. Candidate qualifications can and should be evaluated by well-qualified independent experts in the law and ethics. We believe that the JMSC members should be appointed, not publicly elected, because expertise is very important. This should not be a popularity contest. And we believe that term limits for JMSC members would be useful. We also concluded that a judiciary that deserves the public trust does not just look like the diverse people of our state, but should accurately reflect the perspectives and very different life experiences of the people of our state. We therefore recommend that JMSC forward more than 3 qualified applicants to the General Assembly for their consideration. And we recognize that there is a practical problem in how much material most legislators will read. We understand that you guys work pretty hard here and have a lot to do, but we still believe that it is an obligation of the legislature to choose from a broad spectrum of qualified applicants. We have several other concerns that I'll touch on briefly. We share with others who have spoken to this committee a wish to see stronger requirements for magistrates, and neither magistrates nor other judges should be held over in their positions indefinitely without formal reappointment, leaving them vulnerable to removal without cause. Thank you for your attention. We've also submitted written testimony, and I'd be glad to respond to questions.
Any questions from Ms. Teague? Mr. Ott, do you have a question?
Oh, goodness. Apologies to my fellow committee members, but just trying to figure out what's best, Ms. Teague, and we're probably, this is probably coming to an end as far as all of these opportunities to ask questions. I don't have to tell you how much respect I have for you. You spend an extremely large amount of time in the State House, advocating on behalf of the issues that your organization advocates on behalf of. So thank you for that. I know that we're getting towards the end of the folks that are testifying. I want to put this out there to you because I feel comfortable doing it with you. And let me explain to you my concern. I am concerned that our committee, I said this in a previous hearing that we had, that, I think that this has to be all encompassing. I appreciate the opportunity for us to be taking a look at JMSC. I appreciate the opportunity for us to be looking at magistrates. I think that we are selling ourselves short if we are telling everyone that we just need to fix JMSC or make changes to JMSC, and that all of a sudden we're going to have that model system across the country as far as judicial selections, because I would submit to you that that will not be the case. And we've talked about that before, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Teague, but what I would like for us to do, and I would like to know if you think this is good for us to do, if you would recommend that we do this, is broaden that scope a little bit, not only from JMSC, Mr. Chairman, but also the rules around how we're electing our judges. And I just throw that out there, and I promise I'll let you answer, but I want my fellow committee members to understand that we can let JMSC send us 10 great qualified candidates, or we can limit them to 3.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't set up a system in place once they leave JMSC, that they have a fair shot to bring forward their qualifications to the rest of the body, are we really solving what we want to solve, in your opinion, Ms. Teague?
I absolutely agree that there must be attention to the rules, that once the General Assembly has those qualified individuals, however many, to look at, we hope more than 3. There needs to be as much attention as possible to how the rules can ensure that everyone gets a fair amount of attention. And I know it's hard. I know that, it's not an easy problem to resolve. And
well, I'll say this, and you tell me if you agree with this statement, that our current rules right now can be weaponized against certain candidates.
Oh, absolutely.
Ms. Teague, and what my concern has been, and I think increasingly so over the course of the last few years, when you look at race after race after race, candidate after candidate after candidate, that goes through this extensive process only to very shortly after commitment process or the commitment time leaves the race, drops out. And, I get it. Support comes down, numbers that start getting added up, and maybe there's not a path forward. But I would submit to what I said at the very beginning of this process, that it's the perception. And if we feel like this system can be manipulated in any way, then it's incumbent upon us to try to fix that. And my concern is I've seen proposals out there about where a candidate that is found to be qualified cannot drop out of the race, right? Once they come out from JMSC. I think that's somewhat short-sighted in that there are a lot of reasons that someone legitimately might need to withdraw from a particular race. But I think what that proposal was getting at is that people can't be forced out of the race. They can't be forced out of the race. And I'm seeing more and more of that. And we talk about diversity and you know, whether it was a Supreme Court race theoretically that might have had female candidates that all of a sudden decided to drop out at exactly the same time, or whatever, or you come right on through this particular process right now where, you know, all of a sudden, you know, a text message that could be construed in multiple ways, ends up removing a candidate from a race, or right on down the line. I mean, what is preventing someone from saying, well, I've got 80 commitments. I got 90 commitments. Better get out the race. You're gonna really upset some of these legislators if you stay in the race. It happens. It happens. And if we're gonna allow people truly to come up here and bring their skill sets to the table and truly have a process in which we're electing the best candidates that are before us, we got to change those rules.
I agree.
I appreciate it, Ms. Teague, and that's hopefully, again, going back, not going to be a process by which we change something on the front end. Again, you know, I was talking earlier to Ms. Hudson about, you know, there's plenty of blame to go around. You know, I think there's responsibility to be borne by everyone. Yeah, I think JMSC folks have caught a lot of slack over this, and sometimes deservedly so. But, you know, would you agree that we can fix that, but we still might not end up fixing the overall problem? And so I just think that, Mr. Chairman, that I'm asking for this committee to also consider rule changes that might say, you know what, you can't give commitments at all. Can't give a commitment. We have a deadline right now that says you can't get commitments, and I hate to make you squirm, but
I'm not squirming. I'm just scratching.
I just say, you know, we've got a time frame by right now where you can't get a commitment up until a certain point. Well, I think you solve your whole you can't get out of the race if you say you can't get a commitment until it's time to cast the vote. I think that would cut down on a lot of what people have figured out are loopholes in our system over the years. And again, I blame a lot of that on human nature. And again, I'm not saying that I'm holier than thou. Once you are in this system and you're advocating on behalf of a judge, then, you know, I think it's okay to use the rules that are afforded to you, as long as you don't go outside of those rules. But I know that they can be manipulated and they can be twisted, and that's what I'm trying to cut out. So I just asked the committee to consider that. Thank you.
And I wasn't squirming. I was going to say, when I rolled these 5-gallon buckets in here tomorrow, there was a bucket on that, everything from commitments to counters to how much time we have. I mean, we roll in here, in January, and suddenly, 3 days after the stack of reports, we need to space some time to make that more meaningful, because we have an obligation to go through it and make good decisions, not just base it on the fact your mama lives in Fort Mill or whatever, So we have to do those type things too. And I think, and again, I don't have any ultimate plan other than what Weston and I have kept up with staff, but those are in there too, Mr. Ott, to be visited, I think. Mr. Thigpen and then Mr.
If I could just say on this, the league does not have a specific position on this. Personally, in the lobby, I have felt uncomfortable with seeing what appeared to be people pressured to drop out, because it was easier for everybody if they didn't stay in and force people to make a public vote. And that makes me very uncomfortable. It should not be the case that people feel that they're obliged to drop out because it's easier for everybody.
Yeah, my questions, thank you so much. My questions are along the same lines. Ms. Teague, thank you for not only being here and the way you've presented the research and the work that the League of Women Voters has done. Because I can appreciate you saying, hey, we saw an issue rather than just say what we thought was best. We did some research. And, I've been stating from the beginning that I believe this needs to be more judicial refinement than reform. And it's really because of all the reasons we just spoke about, right? Because if we don't, I don't look at it exactly the same way my colleague does. I understand exactly where he's coming from. But I don't want us to end up in a situation where we move from the frying pan to the fire, and where we overhaul something to such a degree that, of course, there are no guarantees in life, but it becomes fundamentally worse than it was before. And when we talk about the process of how we elect, and this is the point in the question I'm getting to, and my concerns about particularly the cap and lifting it. If we had more candidates, do you think fundamentally it will create more diversity? Because I am one who has been carrying the water for diversity, particularly on the bench, both for minorities and represented women, as well as, African American and other ethnic groups. And I believe it should be diverse thought. Diversity as far as geography. I was the gentleman, I believe, the first walker, not the second one, talked about congressional districts and coming from different parts of the state. When you looked in the past previous elections, we had at-large seats keep going to the upstate. Maybe there needs to be consensus and input from different areas, different life experiences, not just talking about gender and ethnicity, but a true diversity of thought. And so my concern when I look at the process of how we elect, I'm going to call it the campaigning process, where, these judges come up here and really humbly offer themselves, walking from room to room, wandering and meandering through the hall, being pushed in and out of meetings, standing under the garage, trying to shake hands, oftentimes hands not even being offered back, them being here really taking themselves away from their normal walks of life and even ability to even, continue to make money, gainfully be employed. It's grueling, and that's just with 3. In some races, not even having 3. So if we had 10 or 8 or 7, I can't even imagine and I'm gonna say circus, but that's no insult, how crazy and chaotic it would be if that was the case. So one, I don't know if it's manageable or feasible, but even beyond that, even let's say if it was, I'm not sure, and I want your thoughts on it, if having 10 diverse candidates would ensure any different outcome from what we currently have.
Not by itself. I think we need to go back to Mr. Ott's points. For example, if people are not, if the norm is not for people to politely drop out, I think we'll have more diversity if people have to vote on the record for, with respect to everybody who is up there and proposed and judge qualified. And I'm as, appalled as anyone at the idea of 10 candidates for every position having to stand in the garage. They're sometimes so exhausted that they've tried to get my vote. And I've had to explain to them that there's nothing as useless in this building as my vote. So yeah, it's a real problem. But I still think, 3 does allow for too much games playing. I think a lot of, in theory and in practice. And I'm not saying it needs to be, actually the league's conclusion from the study, what people said was send all of them. But I think that may not have been examined as carefully as it might have been. I mean, we would be pleased to see an expansion of the number of names that go forward, but I think it would have to be accompanied by other measures like the rules changes that Mr. Ott mentions, as well as, we heard the Chief Justice come in here. We need more diversity. It actually needs to be something that is actively considered because, it's disturbing when we hear, well, we want a judiciary that looks like South Carolina. No, we want a judiciary that understands what it's like to be a South Carolinian.
Well, let me say, again, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think 99% of what you expressed is my sentiments and feelings and thoughts, and I appreciate, the empirical nature of it, that it's not emotions, feeling, hearsay, anecdotal, but hey, we put this to a study, and I think that it behooves us to study it. I guess where I'm conflicted at, and I just, full disclosure, I believe JMSC acts as a balance to our current rules of how judges are elected. And sometimes I believe JMSC allows for diversity. And that's where I am concerned, particularly about a cap being lifted. I think how you framed it at the end expanded, I think I may be, and this is speaking to me personally, I may be in favor for an expansion, but not a lifting of the cap. Thank you so much.
Mhm. Anyone else?
Mr. Newton is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Teague, thanks for being here. I wanted to speak, Russell, in part to one of the points that you made. It's interesting that the way that the rules are today, based on the timelines, based on when JMSC does its work, that within about 30 seconds after the report that our friends down here, Mr. Caskey and his group works on for a number of months, regardless who's on JMSC, within a matter of seconds of that report being made available, half the races have been decided. And so there appears not to be, for those people that are move forward and engage in committing to candidates on the first day, that there's not been a meaningful opportunity to actually review the report that has been prepared and that is significant in terms of what it says. So among those issues that Mr. Pope made mention of the fact that we've been meeting really since January and talking about this issue with the Speaker of Judicial Elections, is this, how do we look at the rules in a way that it provides for a meaningful opportunity for a screening process to take place before the campaigning can start, so that the members of the legislature have the responsibility and have the role to avail themselves of the information in that report. So I appreciate you making that comment today.
Well, thank you for saying it the way that was probably a lot more understood than the way I said it, Mr. Newton. So thank you for that.
Listen, the easiest way is to say, hold off before you make a commitment until you've actually had the opportunity to read what it says.
And I don't know if people are going to be able to hold off, was the point that I was making. I don't know that people will be able to hold off, which is why I'm saying, please, let's just consider doing away with the ability to actually put down a commitment and then bring it to someone and say, look, here, I've got 96. You better get out of the race. And so I just ask for you to consider that. I also ask you to consider things like, look, I mean, I think over time, we have gotten into this implied understanding that if it is a resident seat, the delegation is going to choose. So look, I mean, if the delegation is going to choose, let the delegation vote. What good are we doing by simply saying that now we're going to take it there? Well, now we've got the entire delegation on board with this one candidate. So guess what? Nobody else's vote matters. So get out of the race. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with saying that if that's the direction the body wants to go and that we're going to yield to the delegation, well, then put it on the delegation.
I want to speak in behalf of Mr. Bamberg to tell Mr. Thigpen, your delegation, an example of what he is. All right, next up, Mr. Wooten's recognized next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Teague, thank you for being here and all you do, obviously. I just got a question on your thoughts on this, and if you don't have them, that's fine. And it's just something for the committee also to consider in this, if it's not been brought up. But so everybody's been throwing around the number 10, so we'll just throw it out there, whether it's 7, whether it's 6, whatever. So say 10 people come through, they get screened out, and then we vote on them. Is that a 50 plus 1% vote? Is that a majority vote? Does the House split that 50-50 like with the Senate, like it was said? And then what happens when you don't get that 50 plus 1? Is there a runoff? Can you make a commitment in the runoff? Is there a commitment time frame there? So when you have 2 candidates left, so how do you, those are things to get a little deeper involved in, but it's easy to say, let them all come out. Well, you do, but then how do you divide them once they get there? And then what are the rules when you divide those? So this is your specialty. So.
Yeah, actually, I mean, it's a voting problem. And so basically, we love avoiding runoffs when possible in the league, and one way to do that is, doing some sort of ranked choice voting. But I'm not sure how it would work in this instance. So I think my answer to you is you have a lot of good questions here, and I don't have solid answers that we've given, the sort of study to that we've given to these other issues.
And right
and we'll
now, because I checked on it, because, we've got a race with three candidates that kind of seem to be in the same place. And right now, the rule is they have to get 50 plus one, and you vote. And if they don't get it, you vote again. And if they don't get it, somebody decides, and that brings our whole question of dropping out versus not dropping out. But
There
at
you go.
some point,
Exactly.
somebody has to get, because I asked Charles specifically, because I was curious about that. That's our rules. You just keep voting until somebody gets it.
Well, they wouldn't necessarily have to drop out if you had a rule like, with
Right.
each round, the low, only the top people would stay in after the
Right.
first round.
Right, and that's interesting too. That may be a point to what Mr. Wood was saying, that maybe you have a rule, we do the tweaks on those voting rules too.
Well, that of course is how many elections are. It's the top two that stay in, if you have that sort of situation.
Right. Let's
Thank you,
see,
Mr.
Mr. Robbins, huh? No, I was not. I was saying, Mr. Robbins recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Teague, I want to thank you very much for conducting a 2-year study of all the folks that have been before us so far on this committee. I think you are the first to have actually done that and trying to accurately get factual information from a range of folks, as I heard you explain a little earlier, is so much better than having people come up here and try to lecture us and tell us how to do our jobs. So I appreciate that very much. And I am very cognizant of Representative Thigpen's desire, as well as Representative Cobb Hunter's desire, as well as your desire to create more diversity. And I have been having those discussions with a number of people throughout my appointment to this committee. And I believe that we have got to develop a bench. And when I say bench, I'm not talking about the judicial bench. I'm talking about a bench like on a team. And I don't think we have enough candidates right now. And I don't think, to Mr. Ott's point, I don't think when we get to the floor of the House is the time to be deciding whether someone is, whether we have enough diversity in the candidates that are being elected. When we get to the floor of the House, the job, I believe, would you agree with me, is to pick the best person, the person that you think is going to be the best jurist in that election. Would that not be the way to go about it?
That selecting the best jurist is, in fact, the point of the whole exercise.
Right.
I think there needs to be some consideration to the fact that a good jurist can bring information to the bench, not your sense of a bench, but to the judge's bench, that others might not bring. We see issues arise in some very controversial cases, like and rulings that make statements, for example, about how soon women can be, know they're pregnant. Well, having been pregnant, I had to laugh when I read what was in the ruling. It was, yeah, that can happen, but it's the exception. It's not the rule.
Well, my point, though, and I wasn't in the legislature when Judge Newman was elected, but I've appeared before Judge Newman for as long as he's been on the bench. And had I been in the legislature when he was elected, I would have voted for him over anybody he was running against. And he got all the publicity in this most recent trial because he's a great judge. But what can we do, to Mr. Thigpen's point, what can we do to encourage minority candidates to become judges? There are plenty of lawyers out there. There are plenty of female lawyers, Hispanic lawyers, African-American lawyers. What can we do to encourage them to want to have a career as a judge?
Okay, to encourage them to have a career as a judge is maybe not my expertise because I'm not an attorney. I'm an archaeologist. I have to, Yeah, that's why, yeah. I am an old fossil at this point. So I'm not exactly sure what would encourage them to apply, but I think a sense that the process is fair would help a lot if they really believe that, for example, there might be some weight given to their having experience and expertise that might be lacking elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. And to her point, Mr. Chairman, we've got a race going on right now where what Mr. Ott just said is playing out right before our eyes. So thank you for the time.
Mr. Newton.
Quick observation, and Mr. Robbins' great point, interesting statistic. The diversity on the bench is reflective of the diversity in the bar. So we got to go behind the bar and we got to start figuring out how to promote the legal career in order to get where we've all mentioned and commented on about having our judiciary look like South Carolina. Thanks.
Mr. Caskey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to be very quick, mindful of the hour, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that with the recent discussion about commitments, I think this committee has shown again that it has not done an adequate job of exploring the roots of where things are. Why do we have the commitment rules that we have now? We had Professor Wilcox, kindly provide the history of South Carolina, but what is not explained is that our commitment rule came about because in a race where a candidate lost in the 60s, that candidate then went about getting commitments immediately. So there was no race the next time. And so in trying to solve a problem, we risk creating another future problem. And there's difficulty in foreseeing that, to be sure. I just caution that we ought to think through these things before we make changes. For example, if we were to adopt some sort of prohibition with respect to meeting with legislators and how you say hi and go in the garage and things, you have to ask the question, who does that then reward? And I think the answer is pretty clearly the candidates who already have political connection, the people who already know legislators. And I'm not sure that's a value that we should aspire to. Again, I'm not saying there's no room for refinement in where we do it, but we ought be mindful of the fact that when we do something, we may be incentivizing something that we don't want to. And so when I hear things about, well, I don't like it when I see people do things, my first reaction is, I like that people see things. I like the fact that people know what's happening, because otherwise, for those who advocate, for example, for the Washington, D.C. model of judicial selection, how do you ever know that someone wanted to be a judge? I would argue that you only ever know if you're politically well connected. That's how you become a federal court judge. You know your U.S. senators, or you know the people who know them, because that's how it happens. Our system doesn't do that. Our system says, I'd like to be a judge. I think I meet the qualifications. I'll pick up an application packet. The whole world will then know, because JMSC will publish that information. And then the process goes on. And again, there are many, many, many refinements. But I offer this pause because we unfortunately can talk ourselves into to single track thinking here. So with that, I digress and leave you alone. Thank you.
Ms. Cobb Hunter is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'm coming in at the tail end of this, but I did want to respond, and I hope that your friend from the league can help us with this. I did want to respond to Mr. Robbins' point about Judge Newman and how qualified he is. I would suggest to you that he is probably, in this day of the General Assembly, would be an aberration. And I don't think that Judge Newman could be elected in the current makeup of the South Carolina legislature. The other point is this business that Mr. Weston Newton mentioned about the bar. And it starts with the bar, and I'm paraphrasing, and it reminded me of a comment that I saw attributed to the Senate Majority Leader, where he suggested that the bar needed to send better candidates. I would suggest to you that that's putting too much on the bar, that there are nuances to this process now, and maybe y'all talked about them while I was not here, but I don't think it makes much sense to me to think that tinkering around the edges is going to make a significant difference. I also really want to impress upon my colleagues and those in the audience that, quite frankly, when you talk about diversity as it relates to race, it does not appear to matter very much to members of the legislature that we have candidates of color who are eminently more qualified than the people they are running against. But it goes back to this notion of relationships. And I think that's a part of my disappointment is that every cycle it's the same thing. And it's almost in some quarters, well, wait your turn or wait until next time. And for especially women of color, your turn never comes because of these personal relationships. And in the last few cycles, I have seen very qualified women of color who should have been elected and were not elected. And so I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that, in my opinion, changing the number of people who come out, changing whether you can get commitments. There are some fundamental flaws in this system we have, and I don't think we have done enough due diligence to even talk about what our recommendation should be. And I'll just end with this, and this is what I'd like my colleagues up here to fully appreciate, because I don't think they do as much as they should. There are so many Black and brown little girls who look at our bench and don't see anyone who looks like them. So from an aspirational standpoint, what message are we sending to little Black girls and little brown girls? And the same can be said, in my opinion, for little Black boys, because we don't have a whole lot. So I'm really trying to wrap my mind around how do you convince people that race doesn't matter? Because unfortunately, it does matter here. And it matters in ways that unfortunately result in a judiciary that is almost 90%, and I'd suggest 95% white, when the people coming before the bench look more like me. And so I don't know the answer. Hopefully, at some point when there's no rush to just say we've done something, that there will be an opportunity to really examine the system and make some significant recommendations. And that is no, Mr. Chairman, no casting no aspersions on the makeup of this committee, on the intentions. Reality is real. And I'm sorry that we are in effect spinning our wheels. And that's my opinion, not the opinion of the committee. But thank you for what you do and what you're trying to suggest that we do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That wheel spinning comment, that was probably a little too far, Ms. Cobb Hunter.
Well, you know me, I never know.
Quit
limits.
sugarcoating it.
Yeah, I just wish I could have learned how to sugarcoat bullshit.
If I can throw in, I've been waiting for years for you guys to spin these wheels so we could talk about this study we did.
We appreciate you being the vehicle for this panel discussion. Thank you. Mr. Thigpen's recognized.
Yeah, very quickly, I do want to echo the points about the diversity and even the statements that were made. It is a direct, pipeline from the bar. But how do we encourage also takes in consideration the people that go through the process and how fair they feel it is. Because when you have qualified people who see themselves and oftentimes are more qualified, then that is a discouragement to them. Because I can't tell you how many African American and female candidates that I've talked to that just said, I'm not going to put myself through that again, and they really feel like they were unfairly treated. So I think fairness of the process does help as well. And I think it's a simplification to say that it's just on the bar, kind of very similar with what Ms. Cobb Hunter said. And so I applaud you all for, again, for your work and your effort, because I do believe the start of this conversation is what's needed to happen. Studies, I think, are what need to happen. I do think we need to make some major changes, but I do think they need to be incremental as well.
Mr. Bamberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will say this as I think the only minority lawyer on the committee. Answering the question of how we get more minority candidates to run for judge is not as simple as looking up here in Columbia. And I'm engaged with the South Carolina Black Lawyers Association. Going back to 2009, when I started law school at USC, I was a law student ambassador for the school. And I've seen the growth, not just in the bar, but in the law schools in terms of recruitment of minority lawyers and things like that. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that, at least in my tenure of adulthood, for lack of better words, I have seen the growth. And I see we got Callie back there from the bar. Talking with minority lawyers, et cetera. I mean, I would encourage folks, if they haven't, have conversations with them, and not just people who've been up here and been through the process. I have met with plenty of lawyers. I'm engaged in almost every facet of law practice in this state, whether it be trial lawyers, presenting to the South Carolina Defense Trial Attorneys Association. And you just don't see a high level of minority lawyer engagement. So I'm not going to just blame politics. Some of it is people just have to choose to be engaged. And these are discussions that have been had with, say, leadership in the Black Lawyers Organization, et cetera. But I will say this, and the process of running for judge is not an easy process. But I really do not like when we talk about folks running as though they're babies. Remember, number one, everybody who runs for judge in this state is a licensed South Carolina lawyer. So whether they were running for judge or not, they have been bestowed with the power to represent people, whether it be over their freedom, whether it be for their money, whether it be the custody of their kids. I am not going to talk about them like they are children up here and, oh, they get treated so bad, et cetera. I've never been through the process of running for judge. I personally opt to treat everyone with respect through that process. But if you don't like somebody not talking to you, not going to say that I see a major problem with that. I mean, you're a lawyer. You know, we're supposed to be cut a little different because of the nature of our work. So the fact that the process is tough, or the fact that someone says, well, I don't like the way I was treated, so I don't ever want to run again, I think that ain't a bad thing for the process, because you may not be cut out to be on the bench. How are you going to make rulings that really, literally, you are empowered, if you're in circuit court and general sessions, to render the death penalty? But running up here is too tough, or you don't like that somebody went and said, hey, you don't have the votes, you should get out. So I just say that to say, looking at the process itself, all good and dandy and great, but looking at the process and trying to change something because some people who run don't have thick enough skin, I don't think that is a good way to do it. So I would just want to throw that out there for the good of the body.
Mr. Ott is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to comment or either respond, whichever way you want to take it, Mr. Caskey. Here's what I think is very important, that we have to put ideas out there on the table for us to figure out what can be done to improve the system. Now, if you don't think that the system can be improved, I get it. Like, if you don't want to talk about any types of ideas from start to bottom that could possibly improve the system, well, then you probably already have your mind made up, and you probably will belittle any idea that comes forward. But at the very least, let's at least acknowledge what ideas are being put on the table and not try to confuse them with something else. So when I talked about commitments, I'm not suggesting that we allow candidates to go get commitments whenever they want to. It was just the opposite. Prevent them from getting them at all. You know, don't allow that particular process to be manipulated. And so when we're talking about making changes to this system, we're not necessarily going to a whole new form of gubernatorial appointment or public elections. I thought we were past, or federal. I thought we were past trying to confuse the system, and we were more narrowly focusing down on to what we can do here as a state. And all I'm saying is I get it. If you don't think that any changes, whether it's rules, JMSC, again, needs to be made, well then, okay. But I think a lot of us feel like we can improve the process. We can improve the process and instill more trust in the process and in our judicial system with the public. And I think the only way we get there is by having these types of discussions, by putting ideas out there and not necessarily going always and just having the sidebar conversations. Let's have it in public. And if I'm wrong, I can say, I can admit when I'm wrong. And if there's a point that I haven't already thought about that might get brought up that says maybe that's not the best idea in the world, I can accept that. You know, so I just ask that we go down that, again, you know, I tried to get us there in that first meeting. Can we make it better? Can we all at least agree that it is set up to be flawed, or it's set up to be taken advantage of? The possibility exists. I still don't know that we're there, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Robbins recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I deeply respect Representative Cobb Hunter's ability to speak and to have her political positions, but I just wanted to point out to her that I really don't agree with her statement about young black girls not having anybody to look up to. And I want to point out some ladies who have distinguished themselves in the legal profession as well as on the bench who are African American women. And the first one I'll start with is Michelle Childs, who back in the early 90s was in the Young Lawyers Division with me, Ms. Teague, and she is now on the federal bench, and I believe was considered this last go-round for the United States Supreme Court. So she is certainly someone to look up to. Judge Margaret Seymour has served with distinction for many, many years on the federal bench. Another impeccable jurist and a great lady to look up to. DeAndre Benjamin here in Columbia served with distinction on the circuit court and is now on the federal bench. Courtney Clyburn Pope was a prosecutor for the town of Aiken and is now a circuit judge and doing an outstanding job on our circuit bench. Pandora Jones in Representative Cobb Hunter's own town of Orangeburg has served for about 20 years now as probate judge in Orangeburg. I hired Pandora in the First Circuit Solicitor's Office back in the early 2000s, who interestingly clerked for Judge Newman before she joined the Solicitor's Office and before she became the Orangeburg probate judge. And then lastly, I would mention Judge Deirdre Jefferson out of Charleston, who worked for one of the best judges in the state of South Carolina's history, Richard Fields, before she became a judge, and has served Charleston County and our state with distinction for close to 30 years now. All of these ladies are African American women who have served with great distinction in their careers. And so I would say to the young black girls in South Carolina, you got plenty of role models to look up to, and particularly in the bar and the bench. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Teague, we're never inviting you back again because they keep wanting to talk. It'd be like on the floor. Every once in a while, I'll get them to put a question mark on it towards you. Mr. Caskey's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid it might even be a federal crime to imply that Judge Childs is nearly as old as Mr. Robbins. So I just had some pause there. And Mr. Rod, I should be clear. I remain totally open to changes. I simply demand that we go through it thoughtfully and fully analytically with our eyes wide open, because as soon as you make a change, there are effects, and we ought not rush things. And that's the proposition that I'm suggesting here, not to denigrate an idea or not, but to fully vet it, because as we heard witness after witness say, we've got a pretty good system. it ain't perfect and we can make it better. And I want to do that, but I don't want to do it carelessly or recklessly for fear of political consequence. And that's all I'm saying. So thank you.
Ms. Teague, you're no longer under subpoena. Feel free to leave.
Thank you, Chairman.
We've got Ms. Rhonda Meissner, is that correct? Is that right?